Single dad missed his eviction court date to help a lost woman. She was the judge's billionaire sister. He thought he'd lost everything by stopping to help a stranger until the woman he saved turned out to hold the power to save his entire life. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when Ethan Carter's eyes opened, responding to an alarm that had become almost unnecessary after years of military service. He lay still for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling of their small rental house, gathering strength for another day of battles. 5:30. The familiar ache in his shoulders reminded him of yesterday's double shift at the auto shop, but there was no time to dwell on tiredness. Not today. Today was too important. Ethan's feet found the cold floor, and he moved quietly through the cramped house, expertly avoiding the creaky floorboards that might wake Lily. The kitchen faucet sputtered before releasing a stream of water. He filled the coffee maker, his movements automatic in the dim light filtering through threadbare curtains. While the coffee brewed, he pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. The pages were filled with careful calculations and circled numbers, attempts to stretch dollars that refused to stretch any further. 3 months behind on rent. The words from the eviction notice burned in his mind. "Morning, Dad!" Lily's voice startled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway in her favorite pajamas, the ones with tiny stars that were getting too short at the ankles. "Hey, sunshine." Ethan quickly tucked the notebook away and smiled. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." Lily climbed onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. "Are you making pancakes?" "You bet. Special occasion breakfast." He reached for the box of pancake mix, grateful he'd saved enough for this morning. "How about chocolate chip?" Lily's face lit up. "Really? Really?" Ethan pulled out the small bag of chocolate chips he'd been hiding. Some days, you needed a little extra sweetness to face what was coming. As he mixed the batter, Lily chatted about her science project and the upcoming school play. Her excitement was infectious, making the weight in his chest a little lighter. He flipped the pancakes with extra flourish, earning giggles from his daughter. "Dad?" Lily's voice grew serious as she watched him plate the pancakes. "Are we really going to have to move?" Ethan's hand stilled. He'd tried to shield her from their troubles, but kids had a way of knowing things. Setting the plate in front of her, he sat down and met her worried eyes. "Listen, sweetheart." He reached across the table and took her small hand. "I've got court today, and I'm going to talk to the judge. I'm going to explain everything, and we're going to figure this out. I promise." "But what if—" "Hey now." He squeezed her hand gently. "Remember what Mom always said?" Lily's lips curved slightly. "God sends help when you least expect it." "That's right." Ethan stood and kissed the top of her head. "Now eat up. We've got to get you to school." While Lily ate, Ethan packed her lunch, peanut butter and jelly, an apple, and the last chocolate pudding cup. He'd skip lunch himself today. The court appearance fee had eaten into their food budget, but Lily would never know that. After breakfast, he helped her pick out clothes and checked her backpack for homework. The morning routine was their dance, perfected over years of it being just the two of them. As he brushed Lily's hair, his eyes caught the photo of Sarah, his late wife, on the dresser. She was smiling, holding a newborn Lily. The sight still caught in his throat sometimes. "There you go, princess." He secured her hair with a band. "Ready to conquer the world?" Lily turned and hugged him fiercely. "You're the best dad ever." The words squeezed his heart. He held her a moment longer than usual, drawing strength from her faith in him. The drive to school was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Ethan's old pickup truck groaned as he pulled into the school parking lot. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, threatening rain. "Have a great day, sunshine." He watched as Lily grabbed her backpack. "Mrs. Martinez is picking you up after school, remember?" Lily nodded, then paused halfway out of the truck. "Dad? Yeah? Everything's going to be okay, right?" Ethan forced confidence into his smile. "Everything's going to be okay. I love you, Lily Pad." "Love you too, Dad." He watched until she disappeared into the building, then checked his watch. 8:15. The hearing was at 9:30. Plenty of time to make it to the courthouse, even with morning traffic. As he pulled away from the school, the first drops of rain hit his windshield. By the time he reached Main Street, it had become a steady downpour. The wipers squeaked across the glass, fighting a losing battle against the torrent. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he mentally rehearsed what he'd say to the judge. He'd explain about Sarah's medical bills, about the hours cut at the shop, about the second job he'd taken. He'd show his payment plan, prove he could catch up if given a chance. They just needed time. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the truck's roof. Ethan glanced at his watch again. 8:45? The traffic light ahead turned red, and he tapped the steering wheel impatiently. The rain was slowing everything down. A sign for Cooper Road caught his eye. The old country road. It would save at least 15 minutes. He'd avoided it since the spring floods had torn up the pavement, but today. Ethan turned onto the narrow road, tires splashing through puddles. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. His windshield began to fog up, and he cranked the defrost higher, willing the ancient heater to work faster. The clock on his dashboard read 9 to 10. His stomach clenched. Still time, but barely. The truck bounced over a pothole, and Ethan winced, praying the old vehicle would hold together. They couldn't afford repairs. They couldn't afford anything right now. "Come on," he muttered, peering through the rain. "Just hold together a little longer." 9:15. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour, and Ethan leaned forward in his seat, straining to see through the gray curtain of rain. He was cutting it close, too close, but he could still make it. He had to make it. For Lily, the truck's tires slipped slightly on the wet road, and Ethan eased off the gas, heart pounding. The rain showed no signs of letting up, turning the world into a watery blur. Through it all, the clock kept ticking, each minute bringing him closer to the moment that could change everything. 9:20. He checked his watch one more time, calculating the remaining distance. The courthouse was close now. Just a few more miles. Just a few more minutes. The rain continued to fall, heavy and relentless, as if the sky itself understood the weight of this morning. The windshield wipers worked overtime against the relentless downpour, their rhythmic swooshing barely keeping up with the sheets of rain that hammered down from the gunmetal sky. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, squinting through the gray morning light that seemed to swallow everything beyond a few yards. His old pickup truck rumbled down the narrow country road like a faithful workhorse, its engine coughing occasionally but pushing through. The tires splashed through growing puddles that had already begun to merge into shallow streams across the worn asphalt. The radio crackled with static between weather updates, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere, calculating minutes, weighing chances, rehearsing what he'd say to the judge if he could just make it on time. The eviction hearing had haunted his sleep for weeks now, and this morning felt like his last shot at keeping the only home Lily had ever really known. A flash of pale color suddenly caught in his headlights, breaking through his anxious thoughts. At first, he thought it was just rain, playing tricks on his tired eyes, maybe a piece of trash blown against a fence post, or a deer that had wandered too close to the road. Then he saw it again, clearer this time, something moving at the edge of the road, swaying in an unnatural way that made his stomach drop. No, not something. Someone. Good Lord, he muttered under his breath, his foot easing off the accelerator. Through the rain-streaked glass, he made out a figure stumbling along the gravel shoulder like a lost soul. A woman, he realized, dressed in what looked like expensive business clothes, a dark dress that clung to her frame, completely soaked through. But no coat, no umbrella, nothing to protect her from the storm that was turning the morning into a gray nightmare. She swayed unsteadily on her feet, each step looking like it might be her last. Ethan's hands tightened on the cracked steering wheel, his knuckles going white. The court hearing loomed in his mind like a thundercloud, ticking away precious minutes with every heartbeat. Judge Holbrook wasn't known for his patience, and arriving even a few minutes late could spell disaster. But he couldn't just drive past, not when someone was clearly in trouble. His father had raised him better than that, and his late wife Sarah would never forgive him if he chose convenience over compassion. He pulled over onto the muddy shoulder, gravel crunching and popping under the truck's worn tires. The woman didn't even seem to notice the vehicle's approach, continuing her unsteady trek through the downpour as if she were walking through a dream or a nightmare. "Ma'am?" Ethan called through the passenger window, rolling it down despite the rain that immediately began pelting his face. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She turned toward his voice with the slow, uncertain movement of someone coming out of deep water. Ethan's breath caught in his throat when he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was probably in her late 30s, with delicate features that spoke of privilege and careful living, but right now she looked like she'd been through hell. Her face was deathly pale, almost translucent in the gray light, and a nasty cut ran along her hairline, dark blood mixing with the rainwater that streamed down her cheek. Her dark hair, which had probably been styled perfectly that morning, was now plastered to her face and neck in wet tangles. But it was her eyes that worried him most. They held a distant, confused look that he'd seen too many times before, back in Iraq. The 1,000-yard stare of someone whose world had just been turned upside down. Shock. I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible over the steady drumming of rain on metal and pavement. She hugged herself with thin arms, shivering violently in her torn dress that offered no protection against the elements. Her lips were starting to turn blue. Ethan was out of the truck in seconds, not caring about the cold rain that immediately soaked through his worn flannel shirt and chilled him to the bone. His work boots splashed through puddles as he hurried around the front of the truck, the headlights casting strange shadows in the storm. "Ma'am, you're hurt. Let me help you." He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm, trying not to startle her. He'd learned in the army that injured people could be unpredictable, especially when they were in shock. "I'm Ethan Carter. Can you tell me your name?" She blinked at him through the rain, water running down her face in steady rivulets. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, another sign that worried him. Grace? I think it's Grace." The uncertainty in her voice made the words sound like a question, as if she were testing the name to see if it fit. "Okay, Grace. That's a good start." Ethan shrugged off his worn denim jacket, the same one he'd planned to wear to court, hoping it would make him look more respectable, and draped it around her shoulders. The jacket was old and frayed at the edges, but it was dry and warm from his body heat. She clutched at it instinctively, her fingers white with cold and trembling so hard she could barely maintain her grip. "We need to get you out of this rain. Did you have an accident? Is there a car somewhere?" The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Grace's eyes widened with sudden fear, the confusion clearing for just a moment to be replaced by something worse, terror. "Did anyone else get hurt?" She grabbed his arm with surprising strength, her fingernails digging into his skin through the wet fabric of his shirt. "Please, were there other people? I can't remember, but if someone else was hurt because of me." "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said gently, covering her hand with his own. Her skin was ice cold, and he could feel the fine tremors running through her entire body. "I haven't seen any other vehicles on this stretch of road. Let's get you somewhere warm and safe, all right? Then we can figure things out step by step." He helped her toward the passenger side of his truck, supporting most of her weight when her knees buckled unexpectedly. She was light, probably lighter than she should be, and her expensive-looking dress was ruined beyond repair. As he helped her into the seat, she clutched his arm again with that same desperate grip. "Did anyone else get hurt?" she repeated, her voice shaking with cold and something deeper, guilt, maybe, or fear. "We'll find out, I promise," Ethan assured her, making sure she was securely seated before closing the door. He hurried around to the driver's side, his clothes now thoroughly soaked and clinging uncomfortably to his skin. The rain seemed to be getting heavier, if that was even possible, turning the world into a gray blur of water and wind. As he settled behind the wheel and started the engine again, his eyes automatically caught the dashboard clock, its red digital numbers glowing like an accusation in the dim light. 8:32 a.m. The hearing was at 9, sharp, and they were still 25 minutes from town if traffic was light and the roads weren't flooding. His stomach clenched into a tight knot. Even if he headed straight to the courthouse now, pushing his old truck to its limits, he'd barely make it in time, and that was assuming nothing else went wrong. Grace huddled in his jacket beside him, her teeth chattering audibly despite the truck's heater working overtime. "Did anyone else get hurt?" she whispered again, staring straight ahead through the windshield with those haunted eyes, as if she could see something he couldn't. The rain drummed harder on the roof, creating a steady percussion that seemed to match his heartbeat. Ethan looked at the clock again, watching it tick to 8:33, then at the injured woman beside him. The cut on her head was still bleeding slightly, a thin trickle of red that mixed with the rainwater dripping from her hair. Her confusion wasn't improving, if anything. She seemed to be getting more disoriented, more lost in whatever memories or fears were cycling through her damaged mind. She needed medical attention, and soon. A head injury like that could be serious, even life-threatening if left untreated. Everything he and Lily had worked for, everything they'd sacrificed and hoped for, depended on making that hearing. Their home, their stability, their chance to stay in the only community they'd known since his wife Sarah had passed away 3 years ago. Judge Holbrook wasn't known for giving second chances, and missing this appointment would almost certainly mean losing their little rental house on Maple Street, the house where Lily had taken her first steps. where Sarah had spent her last good days before. The cancer took her, where they'd built what little life they had left. But the woman beside him was hurt, lost, and clearly in need of immediate help. She kept asking about others being hurt, which suggested she might have been in a car accident, possibly a serious one. If she had a concussion or internal injuries, every minute could matter. He couldn't live with himself if something happened to her because he'd chosen a court date over a human life. The clock ticked to 8:34. Rain pounded against the windows with increasing fury, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the rumble of thunder. Ethan sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the storm-darkened road ahead, facing a decision that he somehow knew would change everything. The rain drummed against the truck's roof as Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. He reached for his phone, pressed play on the voicemail, and listened again to his lawyer's tired voice. "Mr. Carter, this is Bob Mitchell. Just reminding you that Judge Holbrook was crystal clear last time. He won't grant another continuance. Be there at 9, sharp, or the eviction goes through automatically. I'm sorry, but that's how it is." Ethan glanced at the shivering woman beside him, wrapped in his worn jacket. Her expensive dress was soaked through, her mascara leaving dark trails down her cheeks. She stared straight ahead, trembling, lost in whatever fog had claimed her memories. "Grace?" he said softly. "Ma'am, can you remember anything else? Anyone I can call?" She shook her head slowly, her wet hair clinging to her face. I don't know. There was rain, and then..." Her voice cracked. "Why can't I remember?" The dashboard clock read 8:42 a.m., 17 minutes until court. His stomach clenched as he thought of Lily, of their little house with its creaky porch swing where they read stories together. One missed hearing and it could all be gone. But then he pictured Lily alone, confused, walking down a road in the rain. The thought made his chest ache. If it were Lily, he whispered, I'd pray someone would stop. He put the truck in gear and turned away from the courthouse, toward Miller's Diner on Route 40. "Hang in there, ma'am. We'll get you somewhere warm." Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words, though her hands still trembled in her lap. The neon sign of Miller's Diner glowed through the rain like a lighthouse. Ethan parked close to the entrance and helped Grace from the truck. She stumbled, her legs unsteady, and he supported her elbow as they hurried through the downpour. A bell chimed as they entered. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of regulars nursing coffee at the counter. Mary Miller, the owner, looked up from wiping tables and her eyes widened. "Land sakes, Ethan Carter, what's happened here?" "Found her on Maple Road," Ethan explained, guiding Grace to a booth. "She needs help, Mary. Could we get some coffee? And maybe a blanket?" "Of course, honey." Mary hurried to the back, returning with a faded quilt she kept for cold mornings. She wrapped it around Grace's shoulders while Ethan slid into the seat across from her. Steam rose from the coffee cups Mary brought, along with a plate of warm biscuits. "On the house," she said firmly when Ethan reached for his wallet. Grace wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. "Both of you. Can you remember anything now?" Ethan asked gently. "Where you were going? What happened to your car?" Grace's forehead creased with effort. "I was driving, I think. The rain was so heavy." She looked up suddenly, panic in her eyes. "My name? Why can't I remember my last name?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed her hands to her face. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said, his voice steady and calm, the same tone he used when Lily had nightmares. "You're safe now. That's what matters. I'm going to call for help, all right?" Grace nodded, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin Mary had brought. Ethan stepped away from the booth and dialed 911, explaining the situation. The dispatcher promised an ambulance within 15 minutes. When he returned to the booth, Grace had composed herself somewhat. She took small sips of coffee, color gradually returning to her face. "You're missing something important to be here," she said suddenly. "I saw you check your phone earlier. You had somewhere to be." Ethan glanced at his phone. 9:22 a.m. The hearing was long over. He slipped the phone back in his pocket and managed to smile. Nothing more important than making sure you're okay. They sat in comfortable silence until the ambulance arrived, its lights painting the rain-streaked windows red and white. 2 paramedics entered, their boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. As they checked Grace's vital signs and asked her questions, Ethan stood to leave. But Grace caught his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait," she said, "I don't even know your name." "Ethan." "Ethan Carter." "Ethan Carter," she repeated, as if memorizing it. I'll find you. I promise. Her blue eyes held his, filled with a certainty that seemed to break through her confusion. He squeezed her hand once before letting go. Take care of yourself, Grace. From the diner's entrance, Ethan watched the ambulance pull away, its lights cutting through the gray morning. He checked his phone one last time, 5 missed calls from his lawyer. The hearing was over, and with it, perhaps his chance to keep a roof over Lily's head. But as he stood there, watching the ambulance disappear into the rain, he couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. Some things were more important than being on time to court. Some things were worth sacrificing for. Mary appeared beside him, refilling his coffee cup. You did the right thing, Ethan Carter, she said quietly. Don't you doubt that for a minute, Ethan burst. Through the heavy courthouse doors, his boots squeaking against the polished marble floor. Water dripped from his soaked clothes, creating small puddles with each desperate step. His heart pounded as he raced down the echoing hallway, but the empty benches outside courtroom B told him everything he needed to know. The uniformed bailiff stood by the door, arms crossed. He'd seen Ethan's type before, another down-on-their-luck tenant coming too late to plead their case. Hearing's done, sir, he said, not unkindly. Wrapped up 20 minutes ago. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Please, he said, his voice rough. I just need 5 minutes with Judge Holbrook. There was an emergency on the road. Can't help you, the bailiff cut in. But he's still in there, reviewing cases. You can try your luck. Inside the courtroom, Judge Alan Holbrook sat at his imposing bench, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. He didn't bother looking up when Ethan approached. Your Honor, Ethan began, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm Ethan Carter. I was scheduled. Ah, yes, Mr. Carter. The judge's tone could have frozen water. He finally raised his eyes, taking in Ethan's dripping form with obvious distaste. Case number 247B, Dugan versus Carter. Ruling has already been entered in favor of the plaintiff. Sir, if I could explain, Mr. Carter, Judge Holbrook interrupted, removing his glasses with deliberate slowness. This was your third and final chance to appear. Your landlord, Mr. Dugan, has been more than patient with your repeated late payments. There was a woman on the road, Ethan pressed on, his words tumbling out. She was hurt, confused. I couldn't just leave her there in the rain. I got her to safety, waited for the ambulance. That's why I'm late. If you could just... Excuses don't pay rent, Mr. Carter. The judge's words fell like a gavel. Neither do good intentions. Mr. Dugan has bills to pay too, and you've exhausted his. Goodwill. The court has granted him possession of the property. Ethan's throat tightened. How long do we have? You and your daughter have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Judge Holbrook shuffled his papers, clearly dismissing him. Sheriff's office will enforce if necessary. Good day. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, the weight of failure pressing down on his chest. All he could think about was Lily's room, with its carefully arranged stuffed animals and the glow-in-the-dark stars they'd stuck on her ceiling together. 3 days to tear down the only home she'd known since her mother died. Your Honor, please, Mr. Carter. The judge's voice turned sharp. Don't make me call security. The ruling stands. Ethan's military training kicked in. When a battle was lost, you retreated with dignity. He straightened his back, gave a short nod, and turned away. His boots squeaked again on the marble floor, but this time each step felt heavier than the last. Outside the courthouse, the rain had finally stopped. Ethan sat in his truck for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The dashboard clock reminded him it was time to pick up Lily from school. He drove slowly, using the time to compose himself. Lily was too smart. She'd see right through him if he didn't get his emotions under control. The elementary school came into view, its brick walls bright against the clearing sky. Children spilled out the front doors, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to waiting parents. Lily spotted his truck and came running, her dark pigtails flying. Her face glowed with excitement as she climbed in, immediately pulling something from her folder. Dad, look! She thrust a paper at him, beaming. I got all my spelling words right, even necessary and conscience. Ethan forced his lips into what he hoped was a convincing smile. That's amazing, sweetheart. He took the test, seeing the red A+ at the top, decorated with a gold star. I'm so proud of you. Miss Roberts said, I'm the only one who got them all right. Lily continued, bouncing in her seat. Can we put it on the fridge when we get home? The word home felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan swallowed hard, keeping his eyes on the road. Of course we can. Are you okay, Dad? Lily's voice shifted, concern creeping in. You look kind of sad. Just tired, honey. He reached over to squeeze her hand. It's been a long day. Did your meeting at the courthouse go okay? Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced at his daughter's hopeful face and couldn't bear to shatter her world. Not yet. Not when she was so happy about her test. We'll talk about that later, he said softly. Right now, I want to hear all about your day. Lily launched into a story about recess and her best friend Sarah, while Ethan nodded at all the right moments. But his mind was racing, calculating what they could fit in the truck, what they'd have to leave behind, where they could possibly go with his meager savings. The spelling test trembled slightly in Lily's hands as she held it up to the window, admiring the gold star in the sunlight breaking through the clouds. Can we stick it right in the middle of the fridge? She asked, where everyone can see it. Front and center, Ethan promised, his voice barely a whisper. He drove on, holding his smile in place like a shield, protecting his daughter's happiness for just a little while longer. The evening shadows stretched across their small living room as Ethan stirred the bright orange mac and cheese in a dented pot. The familiar smell filled their modest rental home, but tonight it carried a different weight. He divided the simple meal between two mismatched bowls, adding an extra scoop to Lily's portion. Dinner's ready, sweetheart, he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. Lily bounced onto their worn couch, her schoolbook scattered on the coffee table. Her dark hair was tied in, slightly uneven. Pigtails. She'd insisted on doing them herself this morning. The sight made Ethan's heart ache. She was growing up too fast, learning to be independent because she had to. Can we eat here tonight? Lily asked, patting the couch cushion beside her. Please? Ethan normally insisted on proper meals at their small kitchen table, but tonight was different. Sure, honey, just this once. He settled beside her, handing over her bowl. Lily took a big bite, then studied her father's face with those observant eyes that reminded him so much of her mother's. She had always been good at reading him, even when he tried to hide his troubles. Dad? She lowered her fork. Did something bad happen today? Ethan pushed his mac and cheese around his bowl, buying time. What makes you think that? You keep doing your worried breathing, she said matter-of-factly, like when the truck wouldn't start last winter. He set his bowl down and turned to face her. Her small face was so trusting, so certain that her daddy could fix anything. The weight of what he had to tell her pressed against his chest. Lilybug? He began softly, using her special nickname. Remember how we talked about having faith even when things get tough? She nodded slowly, her own bowl forgotten. Well, sweetheart, we're going to need some of that faith now. He took a deep breath. We're going to have to move soon. Move? Her voice quivered. But this is our home. My school is here. Mrs. Johnson next door watches me when you work late. My friend Emma lives just down the street. I know, baby. I know. He pulled her close as the first tears spilled down her cheeks. It's not fair. She buried her face in his shirt, her small shoulders shaking. We didn't do anything wrong. Ethan stroked her hair, fighting back his own emotions. Sometimes life isn't fair, but that doesn't mean God isn't watching over us. Remember what Mom used to say? God doesn't close one door without opening another. Lily sniffled, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. But what if he forgets? He won't forget us, sweetheart. We just have to trust and keep doing what's right. Ethan wiped her tears with his thumb. Speaking of which, would you like to read your favorite story before bed? She nodded, her breath still hitching slightly. The one about the angels? That's the one. He reached for the well-worn book on their side table, its spine cracked from countless readings. The cover showed guardian angels watching over people going about their daily lives. Lily curled into his side as he opened to the familiar page. The story was simple, angels helping people who stopped to help others in need. It had been her mother's favorite book to read to her, and now it was their special nighttime ritual. Sarah was running late to her important meeting. Ethan began reading, his voice taking on the gentle cadence that always soothed Lily. But when she saw the old man struggling with his grocery bags, she knew what she had to do. As he read, Lily's sniffles gradually subsided. Her head grew heavy against his arm, and her breathing deepened. The story's message of kindness being rewarded touched him differently tonight, thinking of the woman he'd helped in the rain. When the story was finished, he carried his half-sleeping daughter to her small bedroom. The walls were covered with her artwork, bright crayon drawings of their family, including one of her mother as an angel watching from above. Ethan tucked her into bed, making sure her favorite stuffed rabbit was beside her. Lily stirred slightly. Dad? Yes, sweetheart. Even if we move, we'll still be together, right? Always, he promised, kissing her forehead. Nothing will ever change that. He waited until her breathing became slow and regular before quietly leaving her room. Standing in her doorway, watching his daughter's peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight, Ethan felt the full weight of the day settle on his shoulders. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible, I hope I did the right thing today. The silence that followed was broken only by Lily's gentle breathing and the distant sound of cars passing on the wet street outside. Each one reminded him of the woman he'd helped, wondering if she was safe, if she'd found her way home. He couldn't bring himself to regret helping her, even though it had cost them so much. The cardboard box made a hollow sound as Ethan sealed it with packing tape. 2 days had passed since the eviction ruling, and the reality of their situation was sinking in with each item he wrapped and packed. Old photo albums, Lily's stuffed animals, kitchen supplies. Their life together slowly disappeared into brown boxes labeled with black marker. Sunlight filtered through the worn curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Lily was at school. He'd made sure to keep her routine as normal as possible, not wanting their situation to affect her education. The house felt emptier than usual, the sound of tape ripping and cardboard folding echoing off the bare walls. Ethan paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, his worn t-shirt showing the strain of the morning's work. The few pieces of furniture they owned seemed to mock him from their spots against the wall, waiting their turn to be dismantled and moved. He tried not to think about where they'd go. The few extended-stay motels in town weren't exactly family-friendly, but they were running out of options. The unexpected sound of tires crunching on gravel drew his attention. Through the window, he watched a sleek, black sedan pull up to his house. The car looked completely out of place in his working-class neighborhood, its polished surface reflecting the mid-morning sun like a mirror. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his leather briefcase matching his shoes perfectly. He moved with the precise confidence of someone who spent their life in boardrooms and corner offices. Ethan's stomach tightened. He'd had enough of lawyers lately. The doorbell rang, its cheap chime somehow making the moment feel even more surreal. Ethan opened the door, acutely aware of his work-worn appearance next to the visitor's pristine presentation. Mr. Ethan Carter? The man's voice was smooth and professional. I'm Mr. Daniels, representing Miss Grace Holbrook. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. I'm sorry, who? The woman you assisted 2 days ago? On County Road 23? Mr. Daniels opened his briefcase, pulling out a crisp business card. She was recently discharged from the hospital and has been quite insistent about locating, in her words, the man who saved her life. The memory of the rain-soaked woman flashed through Ethan's mind. Oh, she's okay then? That's good to hear, but I really didn't do anything special. Mr. Daniels' expression softened slightly. Miss Holbrook disagrees. She's requested your presence at the Holbrook estate tomorrow morning. He produced an elegant envelope. She would like to thank you personally. Ethan raised his hands, shaking his head. Look, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need any reward. Anyone would have done the same thing. Miss Holbrook anticipated your reluctance, Mr. Daniels said with a hint of amusement. She was quite clear that this invitation isn't about money. She simply wishes to express her gratitude face to face. Ethan glanced around at the half-packed boxes, feeling uncomfortable. I'm kind of in the middle of moving. The meeting won't take long, Mr. Daniels assured him, and Miss Holbrook can be quite persistent when she sets her mind to something. There was something in the lawyer's tone, a mix of respect and fond exasperation, that made Ethan reconsider. Besides, he thought, it might be nice for Lily to see that good deeds really did matter, even if they sometimes came with a cost. What time tomorrow morning? Ethan, finally, asked, accepting the envelope. Mr. Daniels smiled, producing a business card. 9 o'clock. The address is on the invitation, but please call if you need directions. And, Mr. Carter? He paused, his expression becoming more genuine. Thank you for helping her. Not everyone would have stopped that morning. As the black sedan pulled away, Ethan stood in his doorway, turning the elegant envelope over in his calloused hands. The name Holbrook tugged at his memory. He'd heard it somewhere before. Pulling out his old smartphone, its screen slightly cracked, he typed Holbrook into the search bar. His eyes widened as headlines filled the screen. Holbrook Foundation donates $50 million to Children's Hospital. Grace Holbrook, the quiet philanthropist. Holbrook's siblings among America's wealthiest families pictures showed elegant charity galas, massive estates, and there, in a photo from some society event, was Grace, looking perfectly composed in an evening gown. Nothing like the confused, rain-soaked woman he'd helped on that country road. Ethan lowered himself onto his front step, still staring at his phone. The woman he'd given his old jacket to, who he'd bought coffee for at that small diner, was a billionaire. He looked up at his modest rental home, at the eviction notice still visible through his window, and felt the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. The sound of a neighbor's lawnmower filled the air with its steady drone, grounding him back in his simple reality. He had boxes to pack, a daughter to pick up from school later, and now, apparently, a meeting at a billionaire's estate tomorrow morning. His life had certainly taken an unexpected turn, but as he stood up to return to his packing, Ethan couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. Inside, he carefully placed the invitation on the kitchen counter next to Lily's school permission slips and overdue bills. The elegant cream-colored paper stood out, starkly against the worn formica surface, like a small piece of another world that had somehow drifted into his own. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Ethan's weathered pickup truck as he drove down the tree-lined avenue leading to the Holbrook estate. He tugged at his collar, uncomfortable in the stiff blue button-down shirt he saved for special occasions. In the passenger seat, Lily bounced with excitement, her navy dress carefully ironed the night before. "Dad, look at all the trees!" Lily pressed her face against the window. "They're so big." "Sure are, sweetheart." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel as iron gates loomed ahead. A security guard waved them through, and the massive Tudor-style mansion came into view. Stone chimneys stretched toward the sky, and manicured gardens spread out in every direction. Ethan's old truck looked out of place as he parked near the circular fountain. He helped Lily out, her small hand warm in his, as they approached the grand front entrance. Before they could ring the bell, the heavy wooden door swung open. Grace Holbrook stood in the doorway, wearing a simple cream sweater and dark slacks. Though elegant, she seemed more fragile than Ethan remembered, her movements careful, her smile genuine but tired. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. "You came," she said softly. "I was worried you might not." "Ma'am?" Ethan nodded politely. "This is my daughter, Lily." Lily stepped forward with a small curtsy that made Grace laugh, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the whole entrance hall. "Please, come in, and call me Grace." She led them through a foyer bigger than their entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and original paintings lined the walls. "The doctors say I had a minor accident. My car slid off the road in the rain, but I remember you, Ethan. You stayed with me, gave me your jacket." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Grace said, firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have driven past, especially in that weather." She paused near a window overlooking the gardens. "I've been different since the accident, more aware of what matters. My brother Alan says I'm not myself, but maybe I'm finally becoming who I should be." At the mention of the judge's name, Ethan tensed. Grace noticed but misread his discomfort. "Oh, don't worry about Alan's moods. He's been overprotective since we lost our parents. He means well, but lately." She trailed off, then brightened as Lily wandered over to a grand piano in the corner. "Do you play?" Grace asked her. Lily shook her head. "I always wanted to learn, but—" She glanced at her father, then fell silent. "Would you like to try?" Grace sat at the bench and patted the space beside her. Lily looked to Ethan for permission, then eagerly joined Grace. As Grace showed Lily simple scales, Ethan watched their heads bent together. Grace's elegant auburn waves next to Lily's messy brown ponytail. His daughter's face glowed with joy as she pressed each key, and Grace's patient instructions reminded him of his late wife's gentleness. "You have a wonderful daughter," Grace said, looking up at Ethan. "She has such a pure heart. Takes after her mother," Ethan replied softly. Grace's eyes filled with understanding. "Is she? Cancer, 5 years ago." Grace reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. The gesture was so natural, so lacking in pity, that Ethan felt his guard lower slightly. "Would you both stay for lunch?" Grace asked. "It's the least I can do to thank you properly." "Oh, we couldn't impose," Ethan started. "Please, Dad?" Lily looked up from the piano keys with hopeful eyes. "It's settled then." Grace smiled. "Martha always makes too much food anyway, and I'd love the company." Before Ethan could protest further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. A tall figure appeared in the doorway, and Ethan's stomach dropped. Judge Allen Holbrook stood frozen, his commanding presence filling the room. He wore a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, but his face had lost its courtroom composure. Recognition flickered in his eyes as they met Ethan's. The silence stretched thick and heavy between them. Lily sensed the tension and moved closer to her father. Grace looked from one man to the other, confusion clear on her face. The judge spoke first, his voice clipped and cold. "Mr. Carter." "Your Honor," Ethan replied, quietly, instinctively placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The elegant dining room of the Holbrook estate fell silent. Crystal glasses clinked awkwardly as servants placed water and wine before them. Judge Allen Holbrook's face had transformed from polite curiosity to stone-cold recognition the moment he spotted Ethan. "You!" The judge's voice cut through the air like ice. "The man who missed his court date." Lily shifted closer to her father, sensing the tension. Ethan sat straight-backed in his chair, his hand steady as he placed his napkin in his lap. "Your Honor, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can." Allen's words dripped with sarcasm. He turned to his sister. "Grace, this is the man I told you about. The one who couldn't be bothered to show up for his own eviction hearing." Grace's eyes widened. "Allen, what are you talking about?" "He's the tenant who gave some sob story about helping a stranger instead of appearing in court." Allen's laugh was hollow. "And now, mysteriously, he appears at our door. Because that stranger was me." Grace's voice rose with sudden clarity. She stood up, her hand gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "He's the one who found me after my accident. The man who gave up everything to help me." The judge's face paled as the pieces fell into place. He looked from Grace to Ethan, his certainty wavering. "Sir," Ethan spoke quietly but firmly, "I had no idea who your sister was that morning. She was just someone who needed help. I made my choice knowing I'd miss court, and I'd make the same choice again." "How convenient." Allen's eyes narrowed. "And now you're here, no doubt hoping my sister's gratitude will solve your problems." "Dad didn't want to come," Lily burst out, her small voice trembling but determined. "The lawyer man had to ask twice." Grace moved around the table to stand beside Ethan and Lily. "She's right, Allen. Mr. Daniels told me Ethan refused any payment. He only agreed to visit because I insisted." Ethan pushed his chair back and stood. "I think it's best if we go. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding." He placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Thank you for your hospitality, miss. Holbrook, please, don't leave." Grace caught his arm. Her eyes were fierce with determination. "Allen, you're letting your pride cloud your judgment. Again." The judge flinched at her words. Something vulnerable flickered across his face before disappearing behind his stern mask. "You don't know what you're talking about, Grace. You don't see the people I deal with daily, the cons, the manipulators." "No," Grace said softly, "but I see how that job has changed you. Ever since the Williams case." Allen's hand tightened around his water glass. "That's not relevant." "It is. You've been seeing threats everywhere since that family fooled you." Grace's voice gentled. "But Ethan isn't them. He's the reason I'm standing here right now." The dining room fell quiet except for the tick of an antique clock. Ethan stood perfectly still, his arm around Lily, waiting. Finally, Allen exhaled heavily. "If you insist on seeing him again, I won't stop you." His tone suggested he was granting a great concession. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Grace's chin lifted. "I don't need your permission, Allen, but I'll take your grudging acceptance." She turned to Ethan and Lily with a warm smile that transformed her face. "Please, stay for lunch. I want to hear all about your work with veterans." The meal that followed was tense but civil. Allen spoke little, watching over his wine glass as Grace drew Lily out about school and her love of drawing. Ethan answered Grace's questions thoughtfully, never mentioning their housing situation or asking for anything. As the afternoon light began to fade, Ethan and Lily prepared to leave. Grace walked them to the door, her steps slower than necessary. "I meant what I said," she told Ethan quietly. "I won't let my brother's wounded pride stop me from doing what's right. You helped me when I was lost. Now it's my turn to help." "Miss Holbrook," Ethan began. "Grace," she corrected gently. "Please, call me Grace." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Grace, you don't owe me anything." "This isn't about owing." Her eyes were earnest. It's about recognizing goodness when we find it. They said their goodbyes, and Ethan helped Lily into the truck. As they drove down the long driveway, Grace stood on the grand porch, her figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Lily, who had been quiet since they left, spoke up softly. "Dad, she looked lonely." Ethan glanced at his daughter, surprised by her perception. In the distance, Grace's solitary figure still watched them from the porch of the massive, empty house. The morning sun streamed through the thin curtains of their half-packed rental home. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he sorted through unpaid bills. Lily had already left for school, her cheerful goodbye still echoing in his mind despite their uncertain situation. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. Ethan almost let it go to voicemail, thinking it was another collection agency, but something made him answer. "Mr. Carter?" Grace Holbrook's warm voice came through clearly. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, ma'am," Ethan replied, straightening in his chair, though she couldn't see him. "I'm up." "I've been thinking about yesterday," Grace said, "and I have a proposition for you." She paused briefly. "I own several community properties in town, including a housing complex that needs serious attention. The previous manager left it in quite a state, and, well, I've seen how you carry yourself, Ethan, how you treat others. Would you consider taking on the role of property manager?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He gripped the phone tighter, trying to process her words. "The position includes a fair salary," Grace continued, "and there's a small apartment near the complex that comes with the job. I know it's not much, but—" "Miss Holbrook," Ethan interrupted gently, "that's more than generous, but I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of what happened." "This isn't charity, Ethan." Grace's voice grew firm. "I've done my research. You served honorably, you have maintenance experience, and everyone I've spoken to says you're trustworthy. I need someone who can restore not just the building, but the community's faith in it. Will you at least think about it?" Ethan looked around their soon-to-be former home, at the boxes stacked against the walls. "May I have an hour? I'd like to pray about it." "Of course," Grace replied, respect evident in her tone. "Take all the time you need." After hanging up, Ethan went to his bedroom and knelt beside his bed, just as he did every morning. But today's prayers felt different, less desperate, more searching. He thought about Lily's face when they'd visited the Holbrook estate, how she'd lit up talking to Grace. He remembered his promise that God never closed one door without opening another. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is your way, make it clear." The answer came in waves of peace, settling over him like morning dew. An hour later, he called Grace back. "Yes," he said simply, "I accept." Grace arrived personally that afternoon with the paperwork, dressed more casually than at the estate in slacks and a sweater. She spread the documents across their kitchen table while Lily watched wide-eyed from her after-school snack. "The salary is non-negotiable," Grace said firmly when Ethan's eyebrows rose at the figure. "It's the standard rate for property managers with your experience level." She pointed to various sections of the contract: health insurance, retirement benefits, and a maintenance budget for the complex. The apartment has 2 bedrooms, small but clean. Ethan read through every page carefully, aware of both Grace's and Lily's eager gazes. The terms were more than fair. They were generous without being excessive. He could feel his military training kicking in, already mentally cataloging what the job would require. "When can we see it?" Lily burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. Grace laughed, her entire face softening. "How about right now? I have the keys with me." They followed Grace's car and Ethan's old pickup, driving to a modest neighborhood on the east side of town. The apartment building wasn't fancy, but it had good bones, a solid 3-story brick structure with a small courtyard. Their new home was on the ground floor, close to the management office. "It needs some TLC," Grace admitted as she unlocked the apartment door, "but it's all yours to decorate as you please." Lily darted inside, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. The living room was bigger than their old one, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The kitchen had dated but well-maintained appliances, and both bedrooms had decent closet space. There's even a little garden patch out back. Grace pointed through the kitchen window. The previous manager's wife used to grow tomatoes there. Ethan stood in the center of the living room, taking it all in, The walls needed fresh paint, and the carpet could use a deep clean, but he could already see the possibilities. More importantly, he could see Lily's excitement as she planned where to put her books and stuffed animals. "When can we move in?" he asked. "The apartment's ready now," Grace replied. "Take the weekend to pack and settle in. You can start work on Monday." She handed him both sets of keys, one for the apartment, one for the office. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter." After Grace left, Ethan and Lily explored every corner of their new home. They measured spaces for their furniture and talked about paint colors. Lily disappeared into her room with her backpack and came out with paper and colored pencils. While she worked on whatever she was drawing, Ethan stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "Thank you for always providing." "Dad," Lily called out, "come see." She'd drawn a picture of their new apartment building with surprising detail, right down to the brick pattern. Above the door, in careful rainbow letters, she'd written, "Home, Sweet Home." "Can we hang it up?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Right here?" She pointed to the wall beside the front door. Ethan found a thumbtack in his wallet. He always carried a few for hanging up work schedules. Together, they placed Lily's artwork in its perfect spot, stepping back to admire it. "Home, sweet home," Lily repeated softly, leaning against her father's side. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. Their new beginning was humble, but it was theirs. And for the first time in months, he felt truly hopeful about tomorrow. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the crumbling veteran's property as Ethan surveyed the work ahead. Paint peeled from the walls like old scabs, and broken windows stared back at him like wounded eyes. But where others saw decay, he saw possibility. He pulled his worn work gloves from his back pocket and was about to start when a sleek car pulled into the gravel driveway. Grace stepped out, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, a far cry from her usual elegant attire. "I brought reinforcements," she called out, holding up 2 paper cups of coffee. "And I'm here to help." Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "Miss Holbrook, you don't have to. Please, it's Grace," she interrupted, handing him a cup. "And I want to. I've never painted walls before." "Never?" Ethan couldn't help but smile, unless you count watercolors in finishing school. She wrinkled her nose, which I probably failed at too. They started with the community room, Grace watching intently as Ethan demonstrated proper painting technique. Her first attempts were messy, paint dripping down her arms, but she laughed it off. A genuine, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise even her. "I haven't done anything this real in years," she admitted, wiping her forehead with her sleeve and leaving a streak of pale blue. Day by day, more helping hands arrived. Mike, a former Marine with a prosthetic leg, brought his carpentry skills. Sarah, an Army veteran who'd struggled to find work, turned out to be a wizard with electrical systems. The property slowly transformed, not just physically, but spiritually, as old soldiers found purpose in rebuilding something together. Grace became a regular fixture, showing up each morning in increasingly casual clothes, her designer wardrobe replaced by paint-stained workwear. She took special interest in the kitchen renovation, determined to create a space where veterans could gather and share meals. One afternoon, while taking a break, she noticed Lily sitting alone, drawing in her notebook. "What are you creating?" Grace asked, settling beside her. "A piano," Lily replied, showing her the sketch. "Mom used to play, but we had to sell ours when she got sick." Grace's eyes softened. "There's a piano at my house, gathering dust. Would you like to learn?" Lily's face lit up. "Really?" And so began their afternoon piano lessons. Grace discovered she was a natural teacher, patient and encouraging. Lily's small fingers grew more confident on the keys, and the Holbrook Mansion's formal music room filled with simple melodies and childish giggles. But their growing friendship didn't go unnoticed. At the local grocery store, whispers followed Grace down the aisles. Shoppers pulled out phones, snapping photos when they thought she wasn't looking. One morning, Ethan found a tabloid magazine someone had left at the construction site. Its cover showing Grace in her work clothes, helping him carry lumber. "You shouldn't have to deal with this," Ethan said when he showed it to her, concern etched on his face. Grace just shrugged, picking up her paint roller. "For once in my life, I don't care what people think. This matters more." The property took shape like a flower blooming in fast forward. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new windows sparkled in the sun, and the garden came alive with vegetables and flowers planted by volunteer hands. The veterans who helped build it already called it home, gathering in the evening to share stories and hope. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in amber and rose, Ethan and Grace sat on the newly finished back porch. The air smelled of fresh paint and coffee, and somewhere inside, they could hear Lily practicing her piano scales. "I never thought I'd enjoy manual labor so much," Grace said, holding her mug with paint-stained hands. "It gets in your blood," Ethan replied. "Reminds you what's real. Is that why you seem different lately? More at peace?" Ethan considered this, watching the sunset deepen. "You know, after Jenny, my wife, passed, I thought I'd never feel settled again. Like I was always running from something." He paused, surprised by his own openness. But here, watching this place come back to life, seeing Lily happy, he gestured to the property around them. "It feels right. Like we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Grace smiled, understanding in her eyes. "It feels like home." They sat in comfortable silence as the day's last light faded, listening to Lily's imperfect but determined playing drift through the open windows. For the first time since losing Jenny, Ethan felt the weight on his shoulders lift. He wasn't just existing anymore, he was living. The peace that settled over him was as real as the coffee in his hands, and the woman beside him, who'd somehow become such an important part of their lives. The morning had started with such promise. Ethan stood amid piles of fresh lumber and paint cans, directing a small crew of local veterans he'd hired for the renovation. The old building's bones were good, it just needed someone to believe in it again. A black Mercedes rolled up the gravel drive, its pristine finish out of place among the work trucks and toolboxes. Judge Alan Holbrook stepped out, his perfectly pressed suit a stark contrast to the dusty construction site. His presence made the air feel heavier, like storm clouds gathering. "Quite the project you've taken on here," Alan said, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain as he picked his way carefully around a stack of drywall. Ethan straightened his shoulders, wiping his hands on his work jeans. "Yes, sir, we're making good progress. The East Wing is almost ready for—" "Spare me the details." Alan cut him off, scanning the property with critical eyes. "Where's my sister?" As if on cue, Grace emerged from the building's main entrance, her usually pristine clothes spotted with paint, a genuine smile brightening her face. When she saw Alan, her smile faltered slightly. "Alan, what brings you here?" "A brother's concern." He gestured for her to follow him away from the workers. Ethan tried to focus on reviewing blueprints, but fragments of their conversation carried across the yard. "This is beneath you, Grace." Alan's voice rose with frustration. "Playing charity worker in some rundown, it's not charity, Alan, it's purpose." Grace's voice was firm but kind. "For the first time since the accident, I feel like I'm doing something real." "Real?" Alan scoffed. "What's real is how convenient it was for him to find you that morning, how perfectly tragic his story is. He's manipulating you, can't you see that?" Ethan's hands tightened on the blueprints, but he kept his eyes down, letting them work through their family matter. The other workers sensed the tension and found reasons to drift toward the far end of the property. "You want to know what's real?" Grace's voice took on an edge Ethan had never heard before. "He gave when he had nothing. Nothing, Alan. He missed his court date, your court date, to help a stranger. He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask for anything in return." "Oh, please. Everyone wants something." "Yes, they do. He wants to help people. What do you want, Alan? To control everything? To never trust anyone?" Their voices lowered, but Ethan could see Alan's face reddening. After a few more heated exchanges, the judge stormed back to his car, gravel crunching under his expensive shoes. He paused at the driver's door, looking back at Grace. "When this blows up in your face, don't expect me to clean up the mess." The car door slammed, and the Mercedes peeled out of the lot, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Grace stood for a moment, collecting herself, then walked over to Ethan. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "No need to apologize," Ethan said quietly. "He's your brother. He's trying to protect you. I don't need protection from good people." She touched his arm briefly, then managed a small smile. Now, where were we with that East Wing? The rest of the day passed in a blur of work, but Alan's words echoed in Ethan's mind. That evening, after the crew had gone home and Grace had left for another charity function, Ethan knelt beside his bed. The springs creaked as he folded his hands. "Lord," he whispered, "give me patience to endure, judgment and wisdom to show truth through actions, not words. Protect this project, not for my sake, but for the veterans who need it. And help Judge Holbrook find peace with what's happening here. A small knock interrupted his prayer. Lily stood in the doorway of their modest apartment, already in her pajamas with her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. "Dad?" she asked, climbing onto the bed beside him. "Why does that man hate you?" Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. "How do you explain prejudice and pride to a 10-year-old? He doesn't hate me, sweetheart. Sometimes when people see truth, real truth, it makes them uncomfortable. Like when I told Tommy his new haircut looked funny." Ethan chuckled despite himself. "Not exactly. More like, remember when you were afraid to try the monkey bars because you thought you'd fall?" Lily nodded against his shoulder. "And remember how mad you got when Sarah said you could do it if you just tried? Sometimes people get scared or angry when others show them a different way of seeing things. Judge Holbrook sees the world one way, and it's hard for him to accept that there might be other ways to look at it. But Grace sees it, right?" Lily asked. "She sees the good stuff." "Yes, she does." Ethan smoothed her hair. "And that's what makes her special. She's willing to look past what things seem to be and see what they could be." "Like our new home?" "Exactly like that." Lily yawned and snuggled closer. "I think Judge Holbrook just needs to try the monkey bars." Morning light streamed through broken windows as Ethan and his crew of veterans tackled the shelter renovation with determined hands and grateful hearts. Days blended into weeks like watercolors in rain, each sunrise bringing new progress and small miracles. Mike, a former Marine with a gift for carpentry and stories that could make a grown man laugh until his sides hurt, crafted sturdy shelves with the precision of a surgeon. His weathered hands moved with muscle memory, each cut and joint perfect despite the tremor that sometimes plagued his left fingers. A souvenir from Fallujah. Tom, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and still flinched at loud noises, revealed hidden talent with a paintbrush that surprised everyone, including himself. He worked in focused silence, transforming ugly walls into smooth canvases of hope. The rhythmic motion seemed to calm something restless inside him, and Ethan noticed how the younger veteran's shoulders gradually relaxed as the days passed. Grace arrived most mornings in casual clothes that grew progressively more paint-splattered and wonderfully lived in, carrying coffee and donuts for everyone like some kind of fairy godmother in designer jeans. Her carefully curated outfits, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, gradually gave way to practical jeans and work shirts that actually fit her spirit. Her perfectly styled hair, usually the work of expensive stylists, often found itself tucked under a baseball cap she'd borrowed from Ethan and somehow never returned. The transformation wasn't just in her appearance. Her smile grew more genuine with each passing day, her laugh more frequent and unguarded. The polished mask she'd worn for years was slowly peeling away like old wallpaper, revealing something beautiful and authentic underneath. "You're getting pretty good at this," Ethan said one afternoon, pausing in his own work to watch her carefully paint trim work in the main hallway. Her tongue peeked out slightly in concentration, and there was a small streak of white paint on her cheek that she hadn't noticed. She'd been coming every day for 3 weeks now, working alongside everyone else without complaint or special treatment. Turns out money can't buy skill. Who knew? Grace joked, but there was a hint of something deeper in her voice, a vulnerability that hadn't been there when they first met. She set down her brush with deliberate care, wiping her hands on her increasingly paint-stained jeans. "You know, after our parents died when I was 16, Alan and I, we handled it differently. He threw himself into law school like a man possessed, and I—" She paused, staring at the fresh paint as if seeing something else entirely. Perhaps the ghost of the girl she used to be before grief and wealth changed everything. "I just kept acquiring things. Bigger house, fancier car, more elaborate charity galas. Like I could fill the empty space with stuff, with noise, with anything that would keep me from sitting still long enough to feel the loss." Her voice softened to almost a whisper. "Until that morning in the rain, I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be human. To do something that mattered without photographers or tax write-offs or people telling me how generous I was." Ethan nodded, understanding flickering in his weathered eyes. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, in the faces of his fellow veterans, in anyone who'd lost something precious and tried to fill the hole with everything except what they really needed. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the steady brushstrokes almost meditative, punctuated only by the distant sound of Mike's hammer and Tom's quiet humming. Around them, the shelter was slowly coming alive, like a patient recovering from a long illness. New drywall replacing crumbling plaster that had seen too many winters, fresh paint covering years of neglect and broken dreams. The smell of sawdust and paint mixed with hope and determination, creating something that felt almost sacred. During lunch breaks, the crew shared stories over sandwiches and thermos coffee, their laughter echoing through half-finished rooms like music from a better world. Grace sat cross-legged on the dusty floor with them, her expensive jeans getting dirty and not caring one bit, soaking in their camaraderie and resilience. Like a plant finally finding sunlight. She watched Ethan lead with quiet strength, the way he instinctively knew exactly when someone needed encouragement or space, when to push and when to listen. One quiet afternoon, as they sorted through donated furniture that kind neighbors had contributed, an oak dresser with one wobbly leg, chairs that had seen better decades, lamps that just needed new shades. Ethan spoke about Sarah, his late wife. His voice was soft but steady, years of grief tempered by acceptance and love that death couldn't touch. She was diagnosed while I was overseas, he said, running his calloused hand along a restored dresser they'd spent hours sanding and staining. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. By the time I got emergency leave and made it home, the doctor said it had spread everywhere. She was so small in that hospital bed, but her eyes. He smiled slightly, lost in memory. Her eyes were still fierce. She made me promise to keep finding joy, to show Lily that life is still beautiful even when it breaks your heart. She said bitterness was just love with nowhere to go. Grace touched his arm gently, her fingers light against his work-worn sleeve. She'd be proud of you, Ethan. The way you've kept that promise, the way you're raising Lily, the way you saved a stranger in the rain when you had every reason to think only of yourself. Days flowed into each other like a gentle river, marked by small victories that felt enormous. A repaired roof that no longer leaked when storms came, new windows installed that let in warm light instead of cold drafts, walls painted in colors that welcomed rather than warned away. The veterans worked with quiet purpose, many finding healing in the simple act of rebuilding something broken, of taking chaos and making it whole again. Grace noticed how Ethan always seemed to know which tasks would best suit each person's needs on any given day. He gave Mike the detailed carpentry work that required focus and precision. He assigned Tom the painting that calmed his restless spirit. When James, the newest addition to their crew, arrived shaking from nightmares and withdrawal, Ethan put him on simple tasks, sorting nails, cleaning tools, until his hands grew steady and his eyes grew clear. The transformation wasn't just in the building. Grace watched the men open up like flowers after rain, share their struggles without shame, support each other through dark moments. She saw how Ethan's quiet faith touched everyone around him, not through preaching or Bible verses, but through consistent kindness and unwavering belief in second chances, in the possibility of redemption for anyone willing to do the work. Sometimes Lily would come after school, her backpack full of homework and her heart full of curiosity, doing her math problems in sunny corners while the adults worked around her. Grace found herself drawn to the girl's resilient spirit, so much like her father's, but touched with a lightness that spoke of being loved unconditionally from birth. They'd take breaks together, sharing cookies from Grace's seemingly endless supply and stories about everything and nothing. Grace teaching Lily simple piano pieces on an old upright they'd salvaged from someone's attic. The piano had been a surprise discovery, buried under dust cloths and memories in a donated furniture haul. Grace had run her fingers over the keys with wonder, realizing she hadn't played in years, not since her parents died and music became another casualty of grief. But with Lily beside her, giggling at wrong notes and clapping at every small success, the music came flowing back like water finding its way home. Finally, after weeks of sweat and hope and countless small miracles, the first room was complete. It was a simple space, freshly painted walls in soft blue that reminded everyone of peaceful skies, restored hardwood floors that gleamed like honey in the afternoon light, a window seat looking out over the garden where someone had planted wildflowers. But it felt like so much more than just a room. It felt like possibility made manifest. Ethan and Grace stood in the doorway as evening light filled the space with golden warmth, transforming the simple furniture into something almost magical. Tears glistened in Grace's eyes as she took in every detail. The careful craftsmanship of Mike's built-in shelves, the smooth perfection of Tom's paintwork, the love that had been poured into every repair like mortar between bricks. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion she didn't try to hide. All those galas, all those grand gestures with photographers and speeches and checks written for tax purposes, and this feels more meaningful than any of them. This feels real. Ethan nodded, his own eyes moist with gratitude and something deeper, a sense of purpose fulfilled, of honoring his wife's memory in the most beautiful way possible. It's not just a room anymore, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything they'd built together. It's hope. It's proof that broken things can be made beautiful again. It's a new beginning for whoever walks through that door. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the walls with amber light that made everything glow like a promise. In that moment, they both felt the profound weight of how far they'd come, not just in renovating the shelter, but in healing their own broken places, in discovering that sometimes the most important work happens not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in quiet spaces where love is measured in sweat and sacrifice, and the simple act of refusing to give up on tomorrow. One sunny afternoon, Grace paced outside the shelter's newly painted entrance, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. Her usual confidence seemed shaken, replaced by an almost childlike nervousness. When Ethan emerged from inside, wiping paint from his hands, she startled. "Oh, Ethan, do you have a minute?" Her voice quivered slightly. "There's something I'd like to discuss." Ethan nodded, noting her formal tone. "Of course. Want to sit in the garden?" He gestured toward the small patch of land they'd cleared for a community garden where wooden benches now offered quiet refuge. They settled on a bench beneath a young maple tree. Grace opened her portfolio, hands trembling slightly. "I've been thinking about everything you've accomplished here. The way you've given these veterans hope, purpose." She paused, collecting herself. "I want to establish a foundation. In your name." Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Ethan Carter Veterans Foundation," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "Initial funding of $5 million, with annual grants for housing projects like this one across the state." She pulled out several documents, spreading them across her lap. "We could help hundreds of veterans, maybe thousands." Ethan stood up abruptly, overwhelmed. He paced a few steps, running a hand through his hair. "Grace, that's too much. I can't accept." "It's not about accepting," Grace interrupted gently. "It's about continuing what you've already started. You've shown me what real change looks like, Ethan. Not fancy galas and photo ops, but actual hands-on work that transforms lives." He turned back to face her, throat tight with emotion. "Why my name, though? This is your vision, too." Grace's eyes softened. "Because you taught me what true service means. That day in the rain, you chose to help a stranger, even though it cost you everything." She stood, moving closer. "Your name on this foundation would remind everyone that one person's compassion can change the world." Ethan felt tears threatening and quickly blinked them away. He thought of his late wife, how she'd always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." Grace smiled, touching his arm lightly. "We'll start small, build it right. Alan's already agreed to attend the launch event." "Alan?" Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Grace laughed softly. "Well, agreed might be stretching it. Let's say he's been strongly encouraged to make an appearance. For family unity, of course." They spent the next hour reviewing Grace's plans. She'd thought of everything: support programs, job training, counseling services. Ethan contributed ideas from his military experience, while Grace took notes in her elegant handwriting. Their heads bent close together over the documents. They barely noticed the afternoon slipping away. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their makeshift garden, Grace looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of feeling neither dared to name. "We make a good team," she said softly, breaking the moment before it overwhelmed them both. Ethan cleared his throat. "That, we do." He gathered the papers carefully, hands brushing hers as he helped her return them to the portfolio. "Thank you, Grace. Not just for this, but for believing in all of this." "I learned from the best," she replied, her voice warm with affection she couldn't quite hide. They walked together to the parking lot, where Grace's driver waited patiently. Before getting in her car, she turned back. "The launch event, would 2 weeks from Saturday work? Nothing too fancy, just local press and some potential donors." "Whatever you think is best." Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I trust your judgment." Grace's smile lit up her whole face. "Good night, Ethan." She hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say more, then quickly slipped into the car. Ethan watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, his mind spinning with the day's revelations. He drove home in a daze, still processing the magnitude of Grace's proposal and the growing feelings he couldn't ignore. That evening, as he tucked Lily into bed, she noticed his thoughtful expression. "Did something special happen today, Dad?" Ethan smiled, smoothing her blanket. "Actually, yes. Miss Grace has some big plans for the shelter, really big plans." "Is that why you're smiling so much?" Lily asked innocently. Ethan felt warmth color his cheeks. "The plans are exciting?" He deflected gently. "Good things are growing, sweetheart." Morning sunlight streamed through the freshly washed windows of the veterans' shelter. Ethan adjusted his tie for the 10th time, feeling out of place in the borrowed suit Grace had insisted on getting him. The lobby bustled with activity as volunteers arranged chairs and hung banners announcing the shelter's upcoming grand opening. "Dad, you look so fancy." Lily bounced on her toes, wearing her Sunday best dress. She reached up to straighten his tie, mimicking what she'd seen in movies. Ethan smiled down at her, his nervousness easing slightly. "Thanks, sweetie, though I feel more comfortable in work clothes." Grace appeared in the doorway, elegant in a powder blue dress suit that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. "The press will be here in 15 minutes, she announced, then noticed Ethan fidgeting. Her expression softened. "You'll do wonderfully, Ethan. Just be yourself." "That's what worries me," he said with a self-deprecating laugh. "I'm better with hammers than headlines." "That's exactly why they'll love you," Grace assured him, touching his arm gently. "Your authenticity is what makes this project special." The room slowly filled with reporters and photographers. Local news stations set up their cameras while newspaper journalists readied their notepads. In the back, Judge Alan Holbrook stood rigid in an expensive suit, his face an unreadable mask. Grace took her place at the podium, commanding attention effortlessly. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice clear, confident. "What you see around you isn't just a building project, it's a testament to the power of human kindness." She gestured to Ethan, who stood quietly to the side. 2 months ago, I was in a car accident on a rainy morning. Disoriented and afraid, I might have been seriously hurt if not for one man's selfless choice to stop and help a stranger. Her voice caught slightly. Ethan Carter didn't know who I was. He didn't stop because I was Grace Holbrook. He stopped because someone needed help. In the back of the room, Alan's jaw clenched. He watched as the reporters scribbled furiously, their attention rapt on his sister's every word. "What truly amazed me," Grace continued, "was learning that Ethan made this choice knowing it would cost him dearly. He had an important court appointment that morning, one that could have saved his home." She paused, her eyes meeting Ethan's briefly. "He chose to help me anyway." The reporters turned to look at Ethan, who stood straight but humble, his hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. Camera flashes lit up the room. "This veterans shelter isn't just about providing housing," Grace explained, gesturing to the renovated spaces around them. "It's about recognizing and supporting the kind of character that puts others first. That's why I'm announcing today the creation of the Carter Veterans Foundation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alan shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles white where he gripped his briefcase. A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to go from facing eviction to running a foundation?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm grateful, but this isn't about me. It's about the veterans who need a second chance, just like I got one. Sometimes the hardest part of coming home is finding your place again." More questions followed. Ethan answered each one with straightforward honesty, while Grace expertly handled the business details. They stood side by side, their natural rapport evident to everyone watching. "Miss Holbrook, some might say this is an unusual partnership. What made you trust Mr. Carter with such responsibility?" Grace smiled warmly. "Spend 5 minutes with Ethan Carter and you'll understand why. He transforms every challenge into an opportunity to help others. The real question is, how could I not trust someone who gives so freely of himself?" Throughout the interviews, Alan remained silent, watching the scene unfold like a judge observing testimony. His expression darkened with each praise heaped upon Ethan, each warm glance between his sister and the former soldier. As the event wound down, photographers asked for pictures. Grace and Ethan stood together near the shelter's entrance, Lily between them. They smiled naturally, comfortable in each other's presence. "One more, please." called a photographer. Miss Holbrook, maybe put your hand on Mr. Carter's arm? Grace complied, and something in their body language, the way Ethan instinctively steadied her, the genuine joy in their expressions, captured perfectly what words couldn't express. The cameras clicked rapidly. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, that same photo appeared on several news websites. Grace and Ethan's smiling faces looked out from screens across the city, their eyes bright with shared purpose and unspoken connection. In his study, Alan Holbrook sat in his leather chair, staring at his tablet. The headline above the photo read, "Billionaire heiress and small-town hero?" His jaw tightened as he read the glowing article about the foundation, about Ethan's integrity, about Grace's transformation since her accident. The judge's fingers gripped the tablet harder, his face reflecting in the darkening screen as he glared at the image of the man he'd once dismissed so easily, now standing proudly beside his sister, changing everything Alan had worked so hard to control. The morning started with sharp raps on Ethan's apartment door. Camera flashes pierced through the window blinds like lightning, and voices called out from the parking lot below. Ethan peeked through a gap in the curtains, his stomach dropping at the sight of at least a dozen reporters clustered around the building's entrance. "Daddy?" Lily stood in her pajamas, clutching her backpack. "Why are there so many people outside?" Ethan forced a smile. "Just some folks who want to ask questions about the shelter." He grabbed his phone, seeing dozens of missed calls and messages. The screen lit up with another incoming call from Grace. "Here's what we're going to do, sweetheart," Ethan said, kneeling to Lily's level. "We'll go out the back way, nice and quiet. Keep your head down and stay close to me, okay?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide with worry. "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey. Sometimes people just get too curious about other people's business." He helped her put on her jacket and led her to the back door, grateful for the emergency exit he'd noticed when they moved in. They made it halfway to his truck before someone spotted them. "Mr. Carter, is it true you orchestrated meeting Grace Holbrook?" A reporter rushed toward them, microphone extended. Ethan positioned himself between Lily and the growing crowd. "No comment," he said firmly, opening the truck door. "Please respect my daughter's privacy." More questions flew at them. Did you deliberately miss your court date to gain sympathy? Were you aware Grace Holbrook was Judge Holbrook's sister? Is there a romantic relationship developing? Lily climbed into the truck, covering her ears. Ethan's hands shook as he started the engine, carefully backing out while reporters pressed closer for photos. At Lily's school, he walked her to the entrance, ignoring the stares from other parents who clearly recognized him from the morning news. "Remember what we talked about?" he asked softly. "If anyone asks questions, just say no. Comment and find a teacher," Lily recited. "That's my girl." He hugged her tight, watching until she disappeared inside. His phone buzzed again. Grace. This time he answered. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "These stories, they're printing. They're horrible lies." He pulled up the local news website. The headline made his heart sink. "Small-town schemer targets billionaire family. The truth behind the Good Samaritan story." The article twisted everything, suggesting he'd known who Grace was all along and deliberately missed court to create a sympathetic narrative. "Grace, none of this is your fault," he said quietly. "Alan is furious," she continued. "He's been calling all morning, demanding I." Her voice cut off as another voice boomed in the background. "Grace, end this call immediately." Judge Holbrook's commanding tone carried clearly through the phone. "No, Alan, I won't," Grace shot back. "You don't get to control my life anymore." Ethan heard heavy footsteps, then the sound of a door slamming. Grace's voice became clearer. She'd moved to another room. "My brother's here," she said unnecessarily. "He's threatening to freeze all foundation funding unless I cut ties with you." Maybe that would be best," Ethan said softly. "I don't want to cause trouble between you and your family." "Don't you dare," Grace's voice cracked. "You're the first real friend I've had in years. The only person who saw me is just me." The door in the background crashed open. "Grace, enough." Alan's voice thundered. "This man is destroying everything we've built. Our reputation, our standing in the community." "Our reputation?" Grace's voice rose. "What about doing what's right? What about helping people who actually need it?" "He manipulated you," Alan shouted. He saw an opportunity when you were vulnerable, and he gave up everything to help me, Grace screamed back. He missed your court date because he was saving my life. And how? Did you repay him? With contempt and eviction. Ethan listened, heart heavy, as the siblings' argument escalated. He heard papers rustling, then Alan's cold voice. It's done. I've already signed the orders. What orders? Grace demanded. Administrative review of all recent property agreements, Alan said stiffly, including Mr. Carter's lease and employment contract. Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming email. His hands trembled as he opened it, an official notice of lease termination and contract review, effective immediately. Grace's sob carried through the phone. How dare you? You can't do this. It's already done, Alan replied. The foundation funding is suspended pending review. I'm protecting you, Grace. Someday, you'll thank me. Thank you. Grace's voice shook with fury. For what? Destroying a good man's life? Taking away housing from veterans who need help? You're not protecting anyone. You're just proving how small and cruel you really are. Ethan heard more shuffling than Grace's broken whisper. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this, I promise. It's okay, he said gently, though his own heart was breaking. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price. I knew that when I stopped to help you that morning, and I'd do it again. Grace's quiet weeping was the last thing he heard before Alan's voice cut in. This conversation is over. The line went dead. Ethan sat in his truck, staring at the lease termination notice until the words blurred. Another text came through from Grace. Don't give up. Truth will win. He looked up at the morning sky, remembering what he'd told Lily about good things growing. Now he'd have to prove to her that faith could weather any storm, even when the clouds seemed darkest. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the half-empty apartment as Ethan methodically folded shirts and placed them in a cardboard box. Each motion felt heavy, weighted with déjà vu. Just months ago, he'd packed these same clothes, these same memories. The only difference was the crushing weight of disappointment that seemed heavier this time around. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor of her room, carefully wrapping her favorite books in old newspaper. Her small hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if trying to make each task last longer. She hadn't cried this time, something that worried Ethan more than tears would have. A gentle knock echoed through the apartment. Grace stood in the doorway, her elegant appearance at odds with her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. Please, she said softly, let me help. Ethan shook his head, managing a sad smile. You've helped enough, Grace. This isn't your battle. But it is. Her voice cracked. Alan is using his power to hurt you because of me. She stopped, catching herself as Lily appeared in the hallway. Hi, Miss Grace? Lily said quietly, clutching her worn teddy bear. Want to see my box of special things? Grace knelt down, her designer dress pooling around her. I'd love to, sweetheart. Her voice was gentle, though her hands shook as she followed Lily into the bedroom. Ethan continued packing the kitchen, listening to the soft murmur of their voices. Grace's laugh, though strained, mixed with Lily's quiet storytelling about each treasure she'd packed. The sound made his chest ache. Later, when Lily went to pack her school supplies, Grace approached Ethan again. I can fight him, she whispered fiercely. I have resources, lawyers. And he's your brother, Ethan interrupted softly. Grace, I won't be the reason you lose your family, but you and Lily are. She stopped again, tears welling in her eyes. Ethan set down the plate he was wrapping. We're what? Important to me, she finished, but her eyes said more. You showed me what real kindness looks like, what faith looks like in action, not just words. Then let me show you one more time, Ethan said gently. Sometimes faith means accepting that the path God has for us isn't the one we imagined. Grace's shoulders slumped. It isn't fair. You helped me when I was lost, and this is how the world repays you? Life isn't about fair, Ethan said, remembering similar words he'd spoken to Lily after her mother died. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs us everything. They worked in silence for a while, Grace insisting on helping despite Ethan's protests. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the windows, Lily emerged from her room with her backpack full of school supplies. All done, Dad, she announced, her voice small but steady. Grace knelt down and pulled Lily into a tight hug. You're such a brave girl, she whispered. Just like your dad. Lily hugged back fiercely. Will we see you again? Grace's eyes met Ethan's over Lily's head. I promise you, I'm going to make this right. Somehow, Ethan touched her shoulder gently. Grace, don't make promises you can't keep. Not to her. Grace stood, wiping her eyes. Then I promise this. I won't forget what you taught me about kindness, about faith. She reached for her purse, but Ethan shook his head. No money, he said firmly. Please, let us keep our dignity. Grace nodded, understanding. She hugged Lily one more time, then walked to the door. There, she turned back. Thank you, she said simply, for showing me what real wealth looks like. After she left, Lily helped Ethan load the last boxes into their truck. The sky had darkened, and a light rain began to fall, just like the day he'd first met Grace. Dad? Lily asked as they drove through the quiet streets. Did we do something wrong? Ethan pulled into the parking lot of their old church, a small, weathered building with warm yellow lights glowing in the windows. No, sweetheart. Sometimes doing right doesn't mean everything works out the way we want. Then why do we keep trying? Ethan helped her out of the truck, and they hurried through the rain to the church's covered entrance. Because faith isn't about winning, he explained, opening the heavy wooden door. It's about trusting that God sees the bigger picture, even when we can't. Inside, the church was empty, except for the soft glow of candles near the altar. Their footsteps echoed on the worn wooden floor as they walked to the front. Ethan lit a candle, its flame dancing in the quiet space. Lily watched the flame. Like Mom's candle? Just like that. Ethan nodded, remembering how they'd lit a candle every Sunday after her mother passed. For strength. They sat in the front pew, Lily curled against his side. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the stained glass windows. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of uncertainty press against him. Lord, he whispered into the quiet sanctuary, I still believe you've got a plan. Lily squeezed his hand, and together they watched the candle flame dance in the darkness, its light steady despite the storm outside. Grace sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and printouts of online articles about Ethan. Her normally pristine desk was cluttered with coffee cups and hastily scribbled notes. Dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed sleepless nights spent searching for answers. Miss Holbrook, her assistant, Sarah, knocked softly on the open door. I have that security footage you requested from Memorial Hospital. Grace straightened in her chair, pushing aside a half-eaten sandwich. Come in, Sarah. Did they give you everything? Yes, ma'am. Sarah placed a small USB drive on the desk. All camera angles from the emergency entrance on the morning of your accident. The head of security remembered the incident clearly, said it was quite memorable. Grace's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the drive. Memorable how? He said a man carried you in, completely soaked from the rain, refused to leave until he knew you were safe. Sarah hesitated. There's something else, the security chief mentioned. The man seemed extremely anxious about the time, kept checking his watch. Grace's heart thumped harder as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen flickered to life with grainy black and white footage. She clicked through the timestamps until she found what she was looking for. 7:42 a.m. The emergency entrance doors burst open. Grace leaned forward, her hand covering her mouth. There was Ethan, his clothes plastered to his body from the rain, carrying her unconscious form. His face was etched with concern as he called out to the nurses. Even through the poor video quality, she could see how carefully he cradled her head, how gently he laid her on the gurney. Sarah, can you enhance the timestamp? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. The image zoomed in. March 15th, 7:42 a.m. Grace's hands began to shake. Pull up the court records. What time was Ethan's eviction hearing scheduled? Sarah shuffled through some papers. 8 a.m. Same day. Miss Holbrook. The footage continued to play. Ethan paced the emergency room, checking his watch repeatedly. A nurse tried to give him a blanket, but he waved it away, pointing at Grace instead. He stayed, dripping wet, until the doctors assured him she was stable. 8:27 a.m. The timestamp showed Ethan finally leaving, running through the rain toward the parking lot. He knew, Grace whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He knew he would miss court, but he stopped anyway. She watched as the footage showed Ethan's truck speeding away. He had rushed to court, hoping against hope to make it in time, to save his home, to keep a roof over his daughter's head. But he had chosen to save her instead. Grace rewound the footage, watching again and again as Ethan carried her to safety. Not once in all their conversations had he mentioned the sacrifice. Not once had he tried to use it to gain sympathy or advantage. He had simply done what was right, accepting the consequences with quiet dignity. Sarah, find me every article about the eviction, every document Alan signed, everything. Her assistant nodded, already moving toward the door, but Grace called her back. Wait, there's one more thing. Grace's voice had changed, taking on a steel edge. Contact my attorney. Have him prepare documents to transfer all my shares in Holbrook Industries to an independent trust. Sarah's eyes widened. Miss Holbrook, that's your entire inheritance. Your brother would... My brother would what? Disown me? Grace laughed bitterly. The time for half measures is over, Sarah. Ethan lost everything to help a stranger. He gave up his home, his stability, his daughter's security, all for me. She gripped the USB drive tightly. Now it's my turn to risk everything for what's right. She turned back to the screen, watching one final time as Ethan carried her through those hospital doors. In that grainy footage, she saw something her wealth had never been able to buy: pure, selfless compassion. This ends now, Grace whispered, her resolve hardening with each word. No matter what it costs me. Sarah nodded silently and left the study. Grace remained at her desk, the security footage still playing on a loop, her fingers wrapped around the USB drive like a lifeline. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her expression was one of fierce determination. The truth had been there all along, captured in black and white, time-stamped, and undeniable. While the world had rushed to judge, to assume the worst, to craft scandalous headlines, the simple reality was that a good man had chosen to help someone in need, knowing it would cost him dearly. Grace thought of Lily's drawings still hanging in their empty apartment, of Ethan's quiet strength as he packed up their lives once again, of the way he still smiled and told his daughter to keep faith. The images burned in her mind, mixing with the security footage playing before her. The time on her desk clock read 9:47 p.m. Outside her window, rain began to fall, just as it had on that March morning. Grace reached for her phone, ready to set in motion the events that would change everything. She wouldn't just clear Ethan's name, she would ensure that kindness like his never went punished again, even if it meant standing against her own brother, even if it meant sacrificing her place in society's upper echelons. Oh, Ethan, she whispered to the frozen image on her screen. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say what it cost you? But she knew why. Because that's who Ethan Carter was, a man who did right not for reward or recognition, but because it was right. A man who would rather lose everything than fail to help someone in need. Grace clutched the USB drive tighter, her tears finally drying. She had made her decision. He lost everything to help me, she said aloud, her voice strong and clear in the quiet study. Now I'll lose everything to save him. Grace's heels echoed sharply through the courthouse's marble hallway as she marched toward courtroom B, each step ringing like a gavel strike. Her usual composure, the practiced elegance that came from years of charity, galas, and board meetings, had been replaced by righteous anger that burned in her chest like a flame. The USB drive was clutched tightly in her manicured hand like a weapon, its small weight carrying the power to shatter everything her brother believed about himself. Several attorneys in their expensive suits scattered from her path like leaves before a storm, sensing the fury radiating from her perfectly composed exterior. Some recognized her, the Holbrook name carried weight in these halls, but none had ever seen Grace like this, her carefully maintained mask finally cracking to reveal the fire beneath. The bailiff, a heavy-set man with kind eyes who'd worked these courts for 20 years, started to stop her. His hand moved toward her arm, then froze as recognition dawned. Miss Holbrook, Judge Holbrook is in recess, but this can't wait, Grace said, her voice cutting through his protest like steel. She pushed past him with uncharacteristic force, her designer bag swinging at her side as she burst through the heavy wooden doors into the empty courtroom. The familiar space felt different now, the rows of polished benches, the American flag hanging motionless in the corner, the elevated judge's bench where her brother had pronounced so many verdicts. Today, it felt like a temple to cold justice, devoid of mercy or understanding. She found Alan in his chambers, hunched over case files behind his massive oak desk, the same desk their father had used when he'd been a judge in this very courthouse. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their father had been known for his compassion, his ability to see the human heart behind every case. What would he think of what Alan had become? Alan glanced up from his papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose, annoyed at the interruption. His chambers reflected his personality, every book perfectly aligned, every file precisely stacked, every surface gleaming with order. "Grace, I'm in the middle of no." Grace's voice cracked like thunder, surprising them both with its force. Years of swallowed words, of polite disagreements, of watching her brother grow harder and more distant, all of it erupted in that single syllable. "You're going to watch something, Alan. Right now." She pulled out her laptop from her designer bag, her hands shaking with barely contained emotion. The expensive leather felt foreign in her trembling fingers as she fought to maintain control. "I don't have time for theatrics," Alan said, his tone dismissive in the way that had always made her feel small. But Grace had found her strength in that hospital room with Ethan, had learned what real courage looked like from a man who'd lost everything, yet still chose kindness. She slammed the laptop down on his desk with a force that scattered his carefully arranged papers across the mahogany surface. Legal briefs and court documents fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves, the perfect order of his world suddenly disrupted. "Make time." Her voice dropped dangerously low, carrying a steel she'd never known she possessed. "You've made plenty of time to judge others, Alan. To sit up there on your bench and decide their fates with the stroke of a pen. Now you're going to judge yourself." Something in her tone, the raw determination, the pain that bled through her anger, made Alan pause. He removed his glasses slowly, studying his sister's face as if seeing her for the first time. He'd rarely seen his usually composed sister this raw, this determined. The Grace he knew was gentle, accommodating, the one who smoothed over conflicts at family dinners and never raised her voice. This woman before him was someone entirely different. Grace opened the laptop with shaking fingers and pulled up the security footage she'd fought the hospital administration to obtain. The screen glowed in the dim light of the chambers, casting shadows across both their faces. "This is the morning you evicted Ethan Carter," she said, her voice steady now, despite the tears threatening to spill. "The morning you decided he was just another irresponsible defendant making excuses. The morning you refused to show mercy." She pressed play, and the room filled with the silent testimony of digital truth. The grainy footage showed the hospital's emergency entrance in stark black and white. Rain poured in sheets across the screen, turning the world into a blur of water and shadow. The timestamp in the corner glowed accusingly, the exact date and time of Ethan's scheduled court hearing. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Ethan, drenched to the bone, his work clothes plastered to his body by the relentless downpour. But it wasn't his soaked appearance that made Grace's breath catch. It was the way he carried her unconscious form in his arms, cradling her like she was made of spun glass. His own jacket draped over her to shield her from the rain that was already soaking him through. "Look at the timestamp, Alan," Grace demanded, her finger stabbing at the screen. "Look at it and tell me what you see." Alan's face paled as his eyes found the glowing numbers in the corner. His mouth opened, then closed, as the full weight of realization began to settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. That was during his court hearing, yes. Grace's voice trembled with the effort of keeping her emotions in check. The hearing you wouldn't reschedule despite his desperate phone call. The hearing that cost him and his little girl their home. The footage continued its silent testimony. Ethan was speaking urgently to the hospital staff, gesturing with one hand while still cradling Grace's limp form against his chest. Even through the poor quality of the security camera, his desperation was visible, the way his shoulders hunched with worry, the frantic movements of his free hand as he tried to communicate the urgency of her condition. "Turn up the sound," Grace ordered, her voice barely above a whisper now. Alan reached out with a hand that had begun to tremble slightly and adjusted the volume control. The chambers filled with Ethan's voice, tinged with the kind of genuine worry that couldn't be faked. "Please, just take care of her. I have to go. I'm already late for court. But make sure she's okay first. Please, I'm begging you." A nurse's voice, professional but rushed. "Sir, we need your information for the paperwork, your insurance." "No time." Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. Just help her, please. I'll come back later, but she needs help now." They watched in heavy silence as Ethan lingered for precious minutes he couldn't afford, his eyes never leaving Grace's pale face as the medical team began their assessment. The timestamp showed he was already 20 minutes late for court. 20 minutes that had sealed his fate in Alan's courtroom. Finally, after ensuring she was in capable hands, Ethan pressed a gentle kiss to Grace's forehead and ran back out into the storm. Grace paused the video on a clear shot of Ethan's face as he looked back one final time before disappearing into the rain. His expression was etched with concern and selfless determination, the face of a man willing to sacrifice everything to help a stranger. This was the man Alan had dismissed as irresponsible, manipulative, unworthy of mercy. "That's what real honor looks like, Alan," Grace said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That's what true character means. That's the man you condemned without a second thought, without even trying to understand his story." Alan sank back in his leather chair as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. The weight of realization was crushing his judicial posture, reducing the stern judge to just a man facing the magnitude of his mistake. I didn't know." "No, you didn't know because you didn't want to know." Grace's voice was sharp with tears and years of watching her brother grow colder. "You were so busy protecting our family's reputation, so concerned with maintaining order in your courtroom that you forgot what our family used to stand for. What Mom and Dad taught us about justice tempered with mercy, about seeing the human heart behind every case." She moved around the desk to stand beside her brother, both of them staring at the frozen image on the screen. "Do you remember what Dad used to say? That justice without compassion is just vengeance in robes?" Alan stared at the paused video, seeing Ethan truly for the first time. Gone was the stereotype of the irresponsible tenant making excuses to avoid payment. Gone was the image of a man trying to manipulate the system. Instead, he saw someone who'd sacrificed everything, his home, his security, his daughter's stability to help a stranger in need. "He never even told me," Grace continued, her voice softer now, filled with wonder and pain. "All these weeks we've been working together, building the foundation, sharing meals and laughter with little Lily, he never once mentioned that helping me cost him his home. Never tried to use it to gain sympathy or advantage. He just accepted the consequences and kept trying to do good anyway." The silence in the chambers was deafening. Through the tall windows, afternoon sunlight slanted across the floor, illuminating the scattered papers like pieces of a broken system. Alan reached out with trembling fingers and touched the screen where Ethan's image stood, frozen in time, a man carrying hope through a storm. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of shame. Grace watched her brother's carefully constructed walls crumble like sandcastles before the tide. The stern judge, the protective older brother, the man so certain of his own righteousness, all of it fell away, leaving just Alan, vulnerable and broken, facing the hard truth of his prejudice and pride. "I've become everything I once fought against," Alan admitted, his voice barely audible in the heavy silence. "I stopped seeing people and started seeing cases, numbers on a docket, statistics to be processed efficiently." He looked up at his sister, his eyes bright with unshed tears that threatened to spill. "When did I lose my way, Grace? When did I stop believing in the very ideals I swore to uphold?" Grace felt her anger begin to soften, replaced by the familiar ache of loving someone who'd lost themselves. This was still her brother, the one who'd protected her after their parents died, who'd worked tirelessly to build a life of security for them both. Somewhere beneath the coldness, that caring heart still beat. "The question isn't when you lost it," Grace replied gently, placing her hand on his shoulder. "The question is whether you're ready to find it again, whether you're brave enough to admit you were wrong and do what it takes to make it right." Alan turned back to the screen, to the image of Ethan carrying his unconscious sister through the rain like she was precious cargo. The timestamp glared at him like an accusation, 9:47 a.m., the exact moment when one man's compassion had collided with another's judgment. The exact moment when true justice had been betrayed by blind prejudice and bureaucratic indifference. "What have I done?" he repeated. But this time, the whisper held something new, not just shame, but the first stirring of resolve. The first seeds of determination to make things right, no matter what it cost, his pride. Grace stood quietly beside him, watching her brother wrestle with his conscience in the gathering shadows of late afternoon. The mahogany-paneled chambers seemed to hold its breath, portraits of past judges looking down from the walls like silent witnesses. The air was thick with possibility, the chance for redemption, for justice finally tempered with mercy. Outside, the courthouse continued its daily business, unaware that in one quiet chamber, a judge was learning what it truly meant to serve justice. And for the first time in years, Grace felt hope blooming in her chest like a flower after winter. The courthouse buzzed with unusual energy for an emergency session. Television crews jostled for position in the hallways, their cameras trained on the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom B. Inside, every bench was packed. Reporters with notepads, curious locals, and a collection of veterans who had worked alongside Ethan at the shelter project. Ethan Carter sat quietly in the front row, his work-worn hands folded in his lap. Lily nestled against his side, her small fingers wrapped around his arm. Grace sat on Lily's other side, her presence both protective and supportive. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Alan Holbrook presiding. Alan emerged from his chambers, his black robe settling around him as he took his place at the bench. His face, usually stern and detached, carried an unfamiliar weight of humility. The customary rap of his gavel seemed softer today. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying a gentle tone that made several regular courthouse staff exchange surprised glances. "We're here today to review case number 2023CV4872, Carter v. Riverdale Properties." The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the papers before him. "Before we proceed, I have a statement to make." The courtroom fell silent. Even the usually restless reporters stilled their pens. "In my years on this bench," Alan began, his voice growing stronger, "I've prided myself on upholding the law with fairness and impartiality. However, recent events have forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes, in our pursuit of legal correctness, we can lose sight of moral righteousness." He turned his gaze directly to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, would you please stand?" Ethan rose slowly, standing straight but humble, the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout his ordeal evident in his bearing. "Mr. Carter, on the morning of October 12th, you missed your eviction hearing. At the time, I interpreted this as negligence and ruled against you. What I didn't know, what I failed to investigate, was that you were absent because you were saving my sister's life." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lily squeezed her father's hand tighter. "The security footage from Memorial Hospital shows you carrying my disoriented sister to safety through the rain, ensuring she received medical care, and waiting until help arrived." Alan's voice caught slightly. "You did this knowing it would cost you your court appearance. You did this knowing it might cost you your home." The judge removed his glasses, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. "When asked later about your actions, you never mentioned this sacrifice. You never used it to gain advantage or sympathy. Instead, you simply continued to serve others through your work at the veterans' shelter." Alan stood, an unprecedented gesture that caused another wave of whispers through the courtroom. "I was wrong, Mr. Carter. My judgment was hasty, biased, and represented a miscarriage of justice. I hereby vacate my previous ruling and order full reinstatement of your housing rights, with compensation for damages caused by my error." Ethan bowed his head slightly, accepting the words without triumph or vindication. "Furthermore," Alan continued, "this case has highlighted serious flaws in our local housing court's treatment of veterans. Today, I'm announcing the formation of a special committee to review and reform our procedures, ensuring that those who served our country receive the consideration and support they deserve." He turned to address the whole courtroom. "Mr. Carter's actions remind us that true justice must be tempered with mercy, and that sometimes the most powerful legal precedents come from moments of simple human kindness." The judge's gavel struck once, decisively. "This court offers its sincere apology to Ethan Carter and his daughter. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted in applause. Veterans in attendance stood at attention, offering silent salutes to both Ethan and the judge. Grace wiped tears from her eyes as Lily hugged her father tightly. Alan stepped down from the bench, something he'd never done during session before. He walked directly to Ethan and extended his hand. "Mr. Carter, can you forgive an old judge who lost his way?" Ethan took the offered hand without hesitation. "There's nothing to forgive, Your Honor. We all need grace sometimes." The simple sincerity of his response caused Alan to blink rapidly behind his glasses. The two men shared a moment of understanding that transcended their previous positions as judge and defendant. As the courtroom began to clear, the assembled media surged forward. Camera flashes sparked like lightning as reporters called out questions, but unlike the hostile ambush of days before, their tone had shifted entirely. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be vindicated? Judge Holbrook, can you tell us more about the veterans' housing reforms?" Mr. Carter, will you continue your work with the shelter program? Ethan stood calmly in the midst of the chaos, one arm around Lily, the other hand still clasping the judges. Grace moved to stand beside them, completing a picture of reconciliation that would appear on front pages across the state. When asked about his reaction to the judge's apology, Ethan's response was characteristically humble. "This isn't about vindication," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. "It's about how grace can heal broken things. Sometimes the hardest storms lead us to the strongest shelters." The reporters scribbled furiously, capturing a story that had transformed from scandal to redemption. Here was no bitter victory or angry triumph, but rather a quiet testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of simple goodness. Outside the courthouse steps, fall leaves danced in the Ohio breeze. The same media that had once hounded Ethan now respectfully gathered around him, drawn not by sensation but by the authentic power of his story. In their midst, he remained unchanged, a father, a veteran, a man who had chosen kindness over convenience and faith over fear. The headlines would be different this time. Not billionaire heiress and small-town hero, but something truer. Justice restored through acts of grace. The real story wasn't about scandal or social status. It was about how one man's choice to help a stranger had rippled outward, touching lives and transforming hearts, even in the most unexpected places. Autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Ethan's modest apartment, catching dust motes that danced in the air as he sorted through the surprising collection of gifts that had appeared on his doorstep. Bouquets of flowers filled every available surface, wild daisies in mason jars, fancy roses in crystal vases, and cheerful sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. Cards and letters spilled across his small kitchen table, each one expressing support and encouragement from townspeople he'd never even met. A gentle knock at the door made him look up. Grace stood in the doorway, her elegant frame silhouetted against the morning light. Her usual polished appearance was softened today. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. "I see the town has been busy," she said, gesturing at the flower-filled room with a warm smile. "Come in," Ethan replied, clearing some cards from a chair. "I haven't had this many flowers since." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Well, since my wife's funeral, but these mean something different." Grace moved carefully through the forest of bouquets, settling into the offered chair. Her fingers traced the edge of a handwritten note nearby. "They see you now, Ethan, the real you." "I'm not sure I deserve all this attention," he said quietly, running a hand through his hair. "I just did what anyone would do." "But that's just it." Grace leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Not everyone would. I need to show you something." She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled up a video file. "This is from the hospital security cameras the morning you found me." Ethan watched as grainy footage showed his own rain-soaked figure carrying Grace through the emergency room doors. The timestamp in the corner made his breath catch, 9:15 a.m., the exact morning of his eviction hearing. "You never told anyone," Grace said softly. "You never mentioned what it cost you to help me that day." Ethan shrugged, his eyes still on the phone screen. "Wouldn't have changed anything. You needed help, that's all that mattered." "It changed everything," Grace insisted, setting the phone down. "Showed this to Alan. I made him watch it, made him see what real character looks like." Her voice caught. "He had no idea you missed court because you were saving my life. None of us knew." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Grace, I don't want the judge feeling guilty. That's not why. He needs to feel it," Grace interrupted. "He needs to understand what his prejudices almost destroyed." She reached across and took Ethan's hand. "I confronted him in his office. I've never spoken to him that way before, but seeing this footage, seeing your quiet sacrifice, it broke something open in both of us." "Is he okay?" Ethan asked, genuine concern in his voice. Grace's eyes filled with tears at his immediate compassion. "You're asking if my brother is okay, after everything he put you through?" "Hate only keeps us where we fell," Ethan said simply. "I learned that in Iraq, watching good men get bitter. I promised myself I'd never let hardship steal my ability to care about others." Grace wiped her eyes, laughing softly. "Do you know what I've learned from you, Ethan Carter? More than all my years of expensive education, more than all my family's wealth could ever teach me?" She squeezed his hand. "I've learned that true riches have nothing to do with money. They're measured in moments like that morning, when someone chooses kindness over convenience, compassion over self-preservation. We all have those moments, Ethan said. Sometimes we just need reminding. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Lily burst through the door, her backpack swinging wildly, clutching a large piece of art paper in her hands. Her face was flushed with excitement. "Dad, Grace, look what I made in art class today." She thrust the paper forward proudly. It was a crayon drawing of a large house, but not just any house. This one had multiple wings spreading out like welcoming arms, with a garden full of flowers and people of all sizes standing together out front. Above it, in careful rainbow letters, she'd written, "The Lily House." "See?" she pointed eagerly. "This is where the veterans can live, and here's the playground for their kids, and this is the garden where we can grow food." She continued explaining each detail, her voice full of hope and possibility. Grace moved to stand beside Ethan, both of them watching Lily's animated description of her dream. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and pulled Grace into a warm embrace, overwhelmed by the moment. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in us." Grace hugged him back tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing me what real faith looks like." Lily looked up from her drawing, beaming at them both. "Can we hang it up? Maybe at the real Lily House when it's ready?" "Sweetheart," Grace said, extending an arm to include Lily in their embrace. "I think this is exactly what the real Lily House needed, your vision of hope." They stood together in the sunlit room, surrounded by flowers and cards from their community, holding on to each other and the promise of new beginnings. Through the window, autumn leaves danced on the breeze, golden and free. The autumn morning sparkled with promise as Ethan Carter stood before the freshly painted building, his hands tucked into the pockets of his new suit. The former warehouse had been transformed into something beautiful, its brick walls gleaming, windows crystal clear, and a welcoming path lined with flowers leading to the front entrance. A crowd had gathered for the grand opening, their excited chatter filling the crisp October air. Grace Holbrook stood beside him, elegant in a simple blue dress. Her presence as natural now as breathing. She reached over and squeezed his hand, sensing his emotion. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I still can't believe this is real." 10-year-old Lily bounced on her toes beside them, wearing her favorite yellow dress and a ribbon in her hair. She beamed at the gathering crowd, waving to familiar faces, veterans Ethan had worked with, townspeople who'd supported them, and even some former critics who'd come around. Judge Alan Holbrook approached them, looking different than he had in court months ago. The stern set of his shoulders had softened, and genuine warmth touched his eyes. "The legal paperwork is all set," he said, extending his hand to Ethan. "I'd be honored to serve as the shelter's legal advisor, pro bono, of course." Ethan shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." "Please," the judge said, "call me Alan. I think we're well past formalities." He cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "What you've created here, it's exactly what this town needed. What I needed to see, if I'm honest." Grace touched her brother's arm. "Sometimes we all need reminding of what really matters." The crowd hushed as Mr. Daniels, Grace's lawyer, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this momentous occasion. But before we cut the ribbon, Miss Holbrook has a special presentation." Grace moved forward, pulling a velvet cloth from something mounted beside the entrance. Ethan hadn't noticed it earlier, too nervous about his upcoming speech. His heart skipped a beat as she gripped the fabric. "Ethan," Grace said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "when you found me that rainy morning, you taught me what true kindness looks like. You gave everything to help a stranger, expecting nothing in return." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "This place isn't just about providing shelter. It's about honoring that spirit of sacrifice and love." With a gentle tug, she unveiled a beautiful bronze plaque. Ethan's vision blurred as he read the words, "The Lily House for those who gave everything founded, 2023. Because sometimes," Grace continued, "the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples of change. And sometimes, those ripples become waves that carry us all home." Lily gasped beside him, her small hand finding his. "Daddy, look! It's named after me." Ethan knelt beside his daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's named after your heart, sweetheart. Your ability to see good in everyone, just like your mom did." The crowd applauded as Grace joined them, and Alan stepped forward with scissors for the ribbon cutting. Ethan looked at them both, the elegant woman who'd taught him to trust again, and the judge who'd learned that true justice requires mercy. Beside him, Lily's presence was a constant reminder of hope. "I never thought," Ethan said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "when I lost Sarah, that I'd ever find family again. But God had other plans." He looked at Grace, seeing all the unspoken things in her gentle smile. "You and Lily, you gave me back more than just a home. You gave me back my faith in miracles." Tears spilled down his cheeks as he hugged them both, no longer caring about the cameras or the crowd. In that moment, he was simply a man holding his family, the daughter who'd never lost faith, and the woman who'd helped him find it again. The morning sun caught the bronze letters of the Lily House, making them shine like a beacon of hope. As the crowd moved forward for the ribbon cutting, Ethan stood surrounded by love, knowing that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as rainy day choices, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries the power to change lives forever. The autumn morning painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and amber as crowds gathered outside the Lily House. Veterans in pressed uniforms stood alongside townspeople in their Sunday best, all waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony to begin. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the heavens like metal flowers. Ethan Carter shifted his weight from one foot to another, tugging at the collar of his new navy suit. The crisp fabric felt foreign against his skin, so different from his usual work clothes. Behind him, the building's fresh white paint gleamed in the morning light, its windows sparkling like diamonds. Lily, wearing a yellow dress that matched the fall leaves, squeezed his hand. "You look nice, Dad," she whispered, smoothing a wrinkle from his sleeve. Her smile carried the same gentle warmth her mother's had. Grace Holbrook stood nearby in a simple blue dress, directing volunteers who arranged chairs and handed out programs. She caught Ethan's eye and gave him an encouraging nod. Even Judge Alan Holbrook was there, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, his usual stern expression softened by something that looked like humility. As the crowd settled into their seats, Mayor Thompson approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're here today to celebrate more than just a building. We're here to witness what happens when faith meets action, when kindness overcomes judgment, and when second chances change lives." When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he walked slowly to the podium, his heart thundering in his chest. The microphone picked up his shaky breath as he unfolded his notes. Then he looked up, saw Lily's encouraging smile, and set the paper aside. "Some folks have asked me how this all started," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Well, it started on a rainy morning when I had somewhere important to be. I was running late, worried about my own problems, when God put someone else's need in my path." The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet strength in his voice. In the front row, Grace dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I had a choice that morning," Ethan continued. "I could keep driving, focus on my own troubles, or stop and help a stranger. The choice cost me something, or at least I thought it did at the time." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. But that's the funny thing about compassion. Sometimes what looks like a loss turns out to be the greatest blessing you never expected. Veterans in the crowd nodded, understanding written across their weathered faces. A few whispered, "Amen. This place," Ethan gestured to the building behind him, "isn't just about housing veterans. It's about remembering that every person has value regardless of their circumstances. It's about believing that kindness matters, even when, especially when, it costs us something." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "My late wife used to say that faith isn't about waiting for miracles, it's about being one for somebody else. That morning in the rain taught me she was right. And now, thanks to the generosity of others who share that belief, the Lily House will be a place where that kind of faith lives on." Applause erupted, punctuated by sounds of sniffling throughout the crowd. Even the reporters had set down their notebooks, caught up in the moment. "So today, as we cut this ribbon, we're not just opening a building," Ethan said. "We're opening our hearts to the idea that when we help others, we help ourselves. That when we lift others up, we all rise together." The audience rose to their feet, their applause thundering across the grounds. Lily ran to her father's side, and Grace joined them, scissors in hand. Together, they cut the blue ribbon, and the Lily House officially opened its doors. As the crowd filed inside for tours, veterans approached Ethan one by one, sharing stories and thanks. Some spoke of their own struggles with homelessness, others of battles with loneliness. Each one found something in Ethan's story that resonated with their own. The day passed in a blur of handshakes and hugs, interviews and photographs. As afternoon faded into evening, the crowds thinned, leaving behind an atmosphere of peaceful accomplishment. The last of the news vans packed up their equipment and drove away, their taillights disappearing into the growing dusk. Inside, the building hummed with its first residents settling in. The smell of fresh paint, mixed with the aroma of coffee from the kitchen where volunteers served dinner, laughter and conversation echoed through the halls, bringing life to spaces that had stood empty for so long. As night fell, Ethan, Grace, and Lily made their way to the small chapel at the heart of the building. The room was simple but beautiful, with wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught the last rays of sunset. A single candle stood unlit on the altar, waiting. Lily held the match with careful hands, looking to her father for permission. Ethan nodded, and together they approached the altar. Grace stood close behind them, her presence warm and steady. "This candle," Ethan explained softly to Lily, "will stay lit to remind everyone who comes here that hope never dies. That there's always light in the darkness if you just know where to look." Lily struck the match, its small flame dancing in the quiet chapel. With steady hands, she touched it to the candle's wick. The flame caught, growing stronger, casting a gentle glow across their faces. The three of them stood there in the candlelight, watching the flame flicker and dance. No words were needed. The moment spoke for itself. Through the chapel windows, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, like distant candles answering the one they'd lit. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Lily house, casting long shadows across the freshly polished floors. Ethan was organizing supplies in the storage room when he heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. He turned to find Judge Alan Holbrook standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes instead of his usual judicial robes. "Mr. Carter," Alan said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "May I have a word?" Ethan nodded, setting down the box of blankets he'd been sorting. "Of course, Judge. Would you like to sit down?" He gestured toward two folding chairs near the window. Alan's shoulders slumped slightly as he took a seat, his usual rigid posture giving way to something more human. Sunlight caught the silver in his hair, and for the first time, Ethan noticed how tired the older man looked. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Alan began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "About that morning in the rain, about the eviction hearing, about everything that's happened since." Ethan remained quiet, giving the judge space to find his words. Outside, leaves rustled in the autumn breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. "I was wrong," Alan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just about the eviction, but about you, about what kind of man you are." He lifted his gaze to meet Ethan's. "The truth is, I was jealous." "Jealous?" Ethan asked softly, genuine surprise in his voice. Alan nodded, a bitter smile crossing his face. "You did what I couldn't do. You helped Grace when she needed it most, without knowing who she was or what you might gain from it, while he paused, swallowing hard. "I've spent years trying to protect her by controlling everything around her, but all I did was push her away." Ethan watched as Alan stood up and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "You know, I used to believe that strength meant never showing weakness, never letting anyone see you vulnerable." He turned back to face Ethan. "But real strength? That's what you showed that morning, choosing to help a stranger even when it cost you everything." The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system. Ethan thought about his own journey, about the times he'd felt lost and alone after losing his wife, about the lessons in humility life had taught him. "Judge Holbrook," Ethan began. "Alan," the judge corrected him. "Please." "Alan," Ethan nodded. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." "I need to ask for your forgiveness," Alan said, his voice barely, above a whisper. "My pride, my prejudice, they nearly destroyed something beautiful that was growing here. I let my position, my authority blind me to what really matters." Ethan stood up and walked over to where Alan stood. "You know what I've learned through all this?" He gestured to the shelter around them. "Sometimes God's greatest gifts come wrapped in our biggest challenges. That morning in the rain, I thought I was losing everything. Turns out I was finding a new beginning." Alan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "How do you do it? Keep your faith like that?" "One day at a time," Ethan replied simply. "And by remembering that we're all just people trying our best to find our way home." He extended his hand toward Alan. The judge looked at it for a moment before grasping it firmly. We've both been given a second chance, Ethan said warmly, shaking Alan's hand. Later that week, Ethan was sorting through donations when he heard familiar voices from the dining area. He walked over to investigate and stopped in the doorway, surprised by what he saw. Alan Holbrook, dressed in jeans and a plain button-down shirt, was serving soup to a line of veterans. His sleeves were rolled up, and he wore an apron with the Lily House logo. What struck Ethan most was the judge's expression. Gone was the stern mask of authority, replaced by genuine warmth as he chatted with each person he served. A veteran in a wheelchair rolled up to the serving line. Alan immediately came around the counter to help him, making sure the tray was secure before returning to his post. The simple act of kindness, done without hesitation or ceremony, spoke volumes about the change in the man. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene unfold. He thought about the journey that had brought them all here, from that rainy morning to this moment of quiet redemption. The shelter had become more than just a building. It was a place of transformation for everyone who walked through its doors. "Looks like we're all finding home again," Ethan said softly to himself, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched Alan continue his volunteer work with newfound purpose and humility. Morning light spilled across the shelter's garden like liquid gold, painting everything in warm amber hues. The spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers and fresh-cut grass. Ethan stood on the wraparound porch of the Lily House, carefully pouring hot water over freshly ground coffee beans in his pour-over setup, a recent gift from Grace, who insisted proper coffee was essential to morning contemplation. A few yards away, Grace and Lily sat cross-legged in the dewy grass, making daisy chains and giggling as they worked. Lily's hair caught the sunlight, reminding Ethan so much of her mother that his heart squeezed in his chest, but for the first time in years, the memory brought more warmth than pain. "Dad," Lily called out, holding up a slightly crooked crown of flowers. "Grace taught me how to make them stay together better." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Ethan replied, smiling as he watched Grace help his daughter weave another flower into the chain. The sight of them together felt right in a way he couldn't explain. The coffee finished dripping, and Ethan poured 3 cups, regular for himself and Grace, and hot chocolate for Lily. He carried them carefully down the porch steps, settling onto the grass beside them. The morning dew soaked through his jeans, but he didn't mind. Grace accepted her cup with a grateful smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Another perfect morning at the Lily House," she said softly. Ethan looked around at the shelter that had become so much more than just a building. Veterans were already starting to stir inside, some heading to their jobs, others preparing for their therapy sessions or skills training. Through the windows, he could see Alan, no longer just the judge, but now a dedicated volunteer, setting up for the morning's legal aid clinic. His mind drifted back to that rainy morning that had changed everything. He'd been so certain his world was ending, rushing to court, desperate to save their home. Now, sitting here in this moment, he could trace God's fingerprints all over what had seemed like his darkest hour. "Penny for your thoughts?" Grace asked, nudging his shoulder gently. "Just thinking about how sometimes our worst days turn out to be gifts in disguise," he replied, watching Lily attempt to balance her flower crown on their old golden retriever, who had wandered over to join them. "That morning in the rain, I thought I was losing everything. Turns out I was finding my way home." Grace's hand found his, warm and steady. Their relationship had evolved naturally, without pressure or expectations. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just a quiet understanding, a shared purpose, and a deep appreciation for how God had woven their lives together. The morning light caught the dewdrops on the grass, making them sparkle like scattered diamonds. A gentle breeze carried the sound of birdsong and the distant chatter of shelter residents starting their day. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the sun on his face. In that instant, he felt Sarah's presence so strongly, not with sadness or longing, but with gratitude. She would have loved this place, these people, this purpose. "Look!" Lily's excited voice drew his attention back to the present. She was pointing toward the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in brilliant strokes of pink and gold. Her flower crown sat slightly askew on her head, and her eyes shone with pure joy. "Dad," she whispered, her small hand finding his free one, "we finally came home." Ethan squeezed both hands holding his daughter's and Grace's and smiled at the sunrise. Sometimes the road you take to help a stranger leads you exactly where you were meant to be. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching nature's morning show, three hearts beating in peaceful rhythm with the new day's promise. The coffee grew cool in their cups, but none of them moved to leave this perfect moment. This gift of grace that had begun with a simple choice to stop for a stranger in the rain. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.